The Fate of Austria. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 26, Buying and Selling Land, Respect Freedom. USA, Chicago Point. Chicago at this time was nothing more than a desolate town point, and there was a young man from continental Europe who spent $200,000 to buy half of the town and the wasteland around the town point. This young man was immediately elected as the mayor of the town. The young man was also very helpless. He was obviously an official of the Austrian Empire and was sent by Baron Brooke to purchase real estate for the Empire Point. As a result, he was inexplicably elected as the mayor of an American town, so he had to write to Baron Brooke of Austria to ask him to make a decision. Point at the same time as this young man appeared in Boston, New York, Philadelphia and other places. The Austrian special officials responsible for purchasing land also attracted people's attention. Someone recognized the young man who spent $1.5 million to buy land in New York. He was the nephew of Baron Brooke, special advisor to the Austrian Emperor. It is said that Baron Brooke is the actual helmsman of the Austrian Empire's finances. More information is constantly being dug up, and the impact of the incident is growing. As the influence of the incident continued to expand, the identities of other people who purchased land on a large scale were also exposed one after another. Among them are descendants of great European nobles, descendants of great bankers, and even descendants of the Sinner family, which once competed with the Rothschild family. This was exactly the effect that Baron Brooke wanted, and he bought the land just for the sake of hype. Almost all bankers know that US land prices have risen too fast, but they are all optimistic about the US land market. It's just that no one has punctured this layer of window paper. All Baron Brooke has to do is to puncture it and let the wind in. As he expected, after this incident, Americans began to value the value of land and no longer sold their land easily. What followed was a wave of people following suit, first in the United States, and then the news spread back to Europe, and capitalists caught wind of it. At this time, the US government was also adding fuel to the fire, launching a series of policies to attract foreign investment, and at the same time issuing a large number of banknotes due to the overheating economy. Banks issued large amounts of loans, and capitalists speculating on land used land as collateral to continue to borrow money from banks and purchase small land. Naturally, land prices soared into the sky. Although the inflow of precious metals into the United States did increase at this time, the amount of banknotes issued still far exceeded the upper limit that the United States could redeem. Philadelphia, headquarters of the Second Bank of the United States of America. Damn it. Andrew Jackson is a short-sighted guy, a bandit with a gun. We must print more money so that more Europeans can invest. When the time comes, we will face a huge fiscal surplus. Look at that bandit. What else can I say? The speaker was Nicholas Biddle, president of the Second Bank of the United States, and Andrew Jackson, whom he called a bandit, was the 7th president of the United States. Since Andrew Jackson was a soldier and made a name for himself by looting Indian lands, the name bandit was well deserved. Biddle's grievance came from Andrew Jackson's refusal to renew the federal charter of the Second Bank of the United States and his plan to close it. Andrew Jackson once told then Vice President Martin Van Buren, "That damn bank is trying to kill me and America, but I'm going to kill him first." Cutting off someone's financial path is like killing one's parents. The parents have a sworn hatred, so Biddle will naturally not speak well of Andrew Jackson. In fact, Andrew Jackson was right. The Second Bank of the United States was indeed affecting the US economy, and it was moving in an unstoppable direction. In the early 19th century, the US federal government did not have its own central bank, and therefore did not issue paper currency. The federal government's money supply is limited to various coins, while paper currency is banknotes issued by thousands of state-approved banks. These banks range from completely reliable and reputable banks to outright scammers at this time. Although the Second Bank of the United States acted as the central bank, it believed in the so-called free economy and issued banknotes crazily. In 2 years, the total amount of banknotes increased by nearly 50%. However, such crazy behavior is only the beginning of its destruction. The headquarters of the Second Bank of the United States was completed in 1824. It was built in imitation of the Parthenon, which means the Temple of Finance. However, it was this temple that witnessed the first real economic crisis in the United States. In 1834, more than 30 million acres of land were sold. 27.92 million acres during the same period in history. There is no doubt that this will greatly alleviate the debt pressure of the United States. And according to this momentum, the United States finances will have a huge surplus. At that time, Andrew Jackson can only apologize to Biddle for what he said. Biddle was smoking a cigar and drinking red wine, looking at the busy crowd outside, and couldn't help but sneer. "What? A bunch of idiots. Why don't you ask me to invest? Now that there is number 100% profit, I'm embarrassed to accept agency fees." "You think so, Mr. Martin?" "Mr. Biddle, you are saying that your prediction is so accurate. The land you asked me to buy in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, tripled in 1 week." Martin Van Buren was answering cautiously. The reason why he spoke so humbly to a speculator was entirely because he had greater ideals. Martin Van Buren didn't want money. He wanted to be the next president of the United States. It's just that Andrew Jackson was a hero in the war. Those who slander heroes are usually villains, and villains cannot become the president of the United States of America. Therefore, there is no one more suitable to be this villain than the genius in front of him, who received a PhD from the University of Pennsylvania at the age of 13 and took control of the largest bank in the United States before he was 30. Biddle and Andrew Jackson attacked each other, hurting both, and it was just around the corner that he would become the next president of the United States. Biddle blew out a smoke ring, choking Martin Van Buren and coughing repeatedly. A sudden sentence shocked him to the spot. "Mr. Martin, what do you think of me running for president of the United States?" But before Martin Van Buren could answer, Biddle said to himself, "That would be boring, wouldn't you say, Mr. Martin?" "Martin." Van Buren was startled into a cold sweat, but he reminded him without changing his expression, "Andrew has never given up on the idea of closing the Second Bank of the United States. If the Second Bank of the United States were to close, it would be a disaster for all freedom-loving American citizens. Don't worry, I will let him admit it himself, that the Second Bank of the United States is the pride of the United States." "Martin." Van Buren raised his glass. "His to freedom." Biddle put out his cigar on the table and picked up his wine glass. "His to freedom." Vienna, Schönbrunn Palace. Thalia was looking at Franz eagerly. Franz knew what she wanted, and it was a French meal. Franz took out a bag, took out a box of foie gras, and handed it to Thalia. "Foie gras, thank you, Archduke Franz. This is my first time eating foie gras." Thalia could not hide her joy. Franz didn't like foie gras at all. It was too greasy. In fact, Franz knew in his heart that Thalia was not necessarily greedy, but was just out of boredom and vanity. Simply, Franz brought back everything he could and let her eat as much as she could. For those who don't know how to invest, please help me to do so. Thank you. Chapter 27. My Italy, why don't you eat? Thalia asked curiously. In fact, Franz was too young to eat much at all. Moreover, the woman in front of her is obviously a noble, but she has no appearance at all. It's not so much unladylike as it is embarrassing. Franz was a little curious about Thalia's true identity, but he thought it would not be detrimental to him. After all, Mrs. Sophie must have investigated it, so he answered casually, "Fat up and eat again." Emotionally speaking, Francis II was an Italian. He was born in Florence, Tuscany, where he spent his childhood and youth. His father was an extremely enlightened and benevolent monarch. When he took office, he abolished all forms of torture and death penalty, implemented a servitude system, lowered taxes, and encouraged industry and commerce, thus winning the support of the Tuscan people. And that was probably the time in Francis II's life when he was most loved by the people. As the future heir of the Grand Duchy, he could feel the enthusiasm of the people wherever he went. Later, his uncle Joseph II encountered fierce opposition from the aristocracy due to his radical reform measures, and finally died of depression. Franz II's father was forced to accept the throne of the Holy Roman Empire. After arriving in Vienna, the family faced a treacherous political situation. Everyone might be an enemy, and no one could be completely trusted. 2 years after Franz II ascended the throne, his father died suddenly. Franz II had to ascend the throne and proclaim himself emperor. Then he met Napoleon, the evil star in his life. Bad news came one after another. Francis II had to dissolve the Holy Roman Empire, but he was never crowned emperor of the Austrian Empire in his lifetime. Perhaps only Italy and Tuscany are the Pure Land in Francis II's heart. And the daughter of Francis II was the Duchess of Parma, Mary Louise, who he married to Napoleon. Francis II always felt that he owed his daughter, so he turned a blind eye to Mary Louise's chaotic private life. This time Mary Louise sent people to ask Austria to build a railway to Parma. It was certainly not her idea. Perhaps it was a lover of Mary Louise, or perhaps the taxes of the Duchy of Parma could not support Mary Louise's expenses. As for the masters of other states in China and Italy, they were all related to Francis II himself, so it was difficult to refuse. In terms of family interests, Austria has been operating in Italy for hundreds of years. It has been fighting with France for hundreds of years, sacrificing countless soldiers and spending countless money. Ignoring the requests of the Central and Italian states will most likely cause these states to fall to France, Sardinia, or even the Bourbon dynasty of the Two Sicilies. This was unacceptable to Franz II at any cost, but at this time, there was nothing in central Italy except gangs and refugees. Industry and commerce were backward, and agriculture could not be self-sufficient. It was a completely rotten land. The mountainous areas of central Italy were both an obstacle to railway construction and a quagmire of rule. As long as the opponents and rebels run into the mountains, even if they send 100,000 troops to encircle and suppress them, they will only return without success. Although the Congress of Vienna recognized central Italy as the sphere of influence of the Austrian Empire. But as long as the Austrian Empire has any idea of annexing the region, Britain, France, Russia, and Prussia will not sit idly by. If it were Francis II in the past, he would definitely choose to ignore the requests of the Chinese and Italian states and then lie down. It's just that after the Austrian Empire joined the German customs union, the entire country was in a state of prosperity, which also gave Francis II a little more confidence. So he decided to only build a railway to Parma. Other states could not build railways directly to Austria, but they could go to Austria through Parma. At the same time, 3 ports were opened to allow free trade from central Italian states to Austria, charging only nominal tariffs. This would not give Britain and France an excuse to intervene, nor would it plunge Austria into a quagmire. Metternich and Count Korolaf both sighed when they saw the emperor's edict. They were really afraid that the emperor's impulsive actions would push the entire country to the brink of war. He was also afraid that the emperor would commit an old habit and just ignore it, thus losing the opportunity to acquire central Italy. Your Majesty is wise, Metternich said first. A very perfect plan. Count Korolaf followed. Franz II was also very satisfied with his plan and nodded repeatedly. At this time Friedrich List said, Your Majesty, there is no need for Austria to use its own money. What do you mean? Metternich asked rhetorically. He felt that this poor man from Württemberg was becoming more and more unruly, and he was always going against him recently. Friedrich List explained to Francis II, I mean we can lend money to the countries in China and Italy and let them use tariffs and part of their power as collateral. As far as I know, the rulers of the countries in China and Italy are not like you. They lack the art and ability to rule. Ability. We can use this. Korolaf immediately understood the key. You mean to ask us to send people to take over the power of the countries in China and Italy? We are just exercising power on their behalf, waiting for them to pay off their debts, and then return the power to them. It is just more efficient for us, the Austrian Empire, to rule directly. Friedrich List really only considered it from the perspective of economic interests, but to the ears of Count Korolaf and Metternich, there was no doubt that this was a huge conspiracy. In Europe, it was common for merchants to ask princes and nobles to pledge customs duties or tax collection privileges as collateral. What a good idea. We can also send military advisors and train the army, so that we no longer have to send troops into central Italy to suppress the rebellion. Count Latter further said. After all, no matter how powerful the Austrian army is, it is always an away battle in China and Italy. Suppressing bandits is by no means a one-touch thing, but requires maintaining a stable order for a long time. Training local people to join the army can avoid this problem, and at the same time, you can take advantage of the opportunity to control the country's army, thereby effectively achieving rule over China and Italy. Is there any better suggestion? Francis II asked. No. Friedrich List's opinion was the most beneficial approach for the Austrian Empire at this time. Then, very good. Metternich, you and Mr. List, as representatives of our country, go to discuss with the ambassadors of China and Italy. This matter must be negotiated, which involves the future of millions of people in China and Italy. Plus, I, Metternich, will definitely fulfill my mission. Metternich saluted with great grace. After the Imperial meeting, Francis II touched the head of his grandson who was eavesdropping from behind and said, "My Italy is back. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels." Chapter 28 Letters from Ambrosius. Austria's crazy railway construction has led to a major problem, that is, Austria's pig iron production is seriously insufficient. Since then, a large number of steel companies have sprung up. The demand for coal mines also increased rapidly, and Austria's industrialization began to accelerate. Vienna, Schönbrunn Palace. Thalia bounded into Franz's room, waving the letter in her hand. "I have a letter from Archduke Franz, the Archduke who came from the country." Seeing Thalia's proud look, Franz couldn't help but be curious. "Why are you so happy?" Thalia asked instead without answering directly. "Want me to read the letter to you?" Franz sighed. "Ah, you worried that, if you teach me, you will be laid off in the future? Don't worry, it won't happen. I'll read the letter by myself, just so I can read." Franz was confused as soon as he opened the letter. What was this? At this time, Franz had already learned German and French. In his previous life, he knew some English, but he had no clue what he was seeing. "You don't understand, little genius. This is Spanish," Thalia said with a smile. Franz was speechless for a while. Why should an Austrian write in Spanish? So I had to say, then, just read it. At this time, Thalia started to sell things again. "Ah, you asking for help? Have you forgotten the etiquette of nobles, dear Miss Thalia? Can I ask you to read a letter?" Franz stood up, bowed, and said every word. "Then, I will reluctantly agree to you." Thalia took the letter and read it. "Dear nephew, Franz, as you said, my application to serve as a military observer in Chinlo caused quite a stir in the military. After intense discussions, the military brass finally accepted my application. General Chiril told me that he would do his best to find someone for me. But in the end, I only found 2 warriors who knew the Chenla language and were willing to follow me to Chenla. At the same time, Prince Metternich also found me. He hoped that I could become Austria's envoy, establish diplomatic relations with Chenla, and collect as much intelligence about this country as possible. I was also given some permissions, so that I could protect myself at critical moments. He would send a professional diplomat to accompany me, and I readily agreed, not missing an opportunity to grow my small team. Normally, a military observer should have 20 followers. There are currently 2 officers and a diplomat in my team. In the end, I could only find 17 desperados. Oh, no, it was adventurers who traveled with me, and I barely managed to make up 20 people. Most of them are Spanish and Portuguese. These people travel between Europe and Asia all year round, and have some understanding of the situation in Chinla. It's just that these people don't speak German, but fortunately we can speak Spanish and Portuguese. In comparison, church priests are much more affordable. Archbishop Rorschach received me personally and told me the gospel of the Lord. There are just over 10,000 words here. Archbishop Rorschach hoped that I could bring civilization and the gospel of the Lord to Chenla, so 3 more missionaries were added to my team. The church provided 20,000 florins for the trip and 1,000 newly printed Bibles. Later, through church connections, we contacted a French merchant ship, and the captain was willing to take us there. At this time, France was the only European country that could trade with Vietnam and Chenla. We have now arrived at the Cape of Good Hope, having been unfortunately caught in a storm on the way, in which 2 members of the suite were killed. Since no bodies were found, the priest could only pray to the sea, hoping to guide their souls to heaven. By the time you receive this letter from me, we should have arrived in Chinla. May God bless us to fulfill the great trust of our country and church. Bless me, may I find the princess and save her. Ambrosius. Franz was thinking about the problems that Ambrosius might encounter. In the last letter to Ambrosius, he had already told him the unspoken rules and some precautions of Eastern officialdom. For example, don't stare into other people's eyes in Europe. It may be disrespectful to others if you speak without looking at them. In some places in Southeast Asia, it is considered impolite to look at others. Of course, if you stare at a woman, that's a different story, and people will think you like her after thinking about it. There is only one thing to remind Ambrosius now, and that is not to act too hastily, and it will be more efficient to send the letter directly to Schönbrunn Palace than to the inefficient Austrian bureaucracy. Thalia asked curiously. I asked a well-informed general that Vietnam is one of the most powerful countries in Asia, with an area the size of France. Archduke Ambrosius, who only has 20 men, wants to save the princess. Can he do it? The evil dragon is as big as a mountain and lives in a strong castle. Did the knight retreat? Franz asked. But those are all fairy tales. Ah, all fairy tales lies? Franz acted rogue. After all, he could do this at a young age. Thalia was indeed in a dilemma, and she didn't know how to explain it. I had to say, have you finished your homework? You're lazy again. Go. Obviously, you are the one who wants to read the letter to me. You're still talking back. I'll fight you. Thalia was too lazy to reason. Seeing no one around, she dropped the letter and rushed over to rub Franz's head. Franz knew that if he wanted to help Ambrosius, he had to rely on the power of the church. After all, Emperor Min of Vietnam prohibited Western missionaries from preaching in Vietnam, so Vietnam offended the French. France had helped the Vietnamese, providing weapons and funds in Vietnam's founding war and even sending a team of officers to help train Vietnamese soldiers. France's evaluation of Vietnam is that it threw France's blessings behind and became the enemy of the European civilized world. Although missionary work is prohibited in Vietnam, the church has never given up on missionary work in Vietnam. Emperor Min of Vietnam ordered the arrest of Western missionaries who preached secretly and persecuted their own Christians. In the near future, the French will invade Vietnam in the name of protecting persecuted Christians. The French church once called on European Catholics to go to Southeast Asia to spread the gospel of the Lord. However, these people are not stupid. Since the Vietnamese government prohibits preaching, they will go to places where the Vietnamese government's power cannot reach them. For example, rural areas, such as Chenla. Among them, of course, were missionaries from Austria and Italy. As the leader of the religious community in the Austrian Empire, Prussia certainly had the means to contact these people. And these missionaries who understood the local conditions were worth far more than sending an army to Chenla. Chapter 29. What is supposed to come will always come. March 1835. The old emperor, Franz II, suddenly felt unwell. After a subsequent examination by a doctor, it was found that the emperor's body was about to collapse, and he might not have a few more days to live. Francis II left his palace and wandered aimlessly around the palace. As he walked, he came to his grandson's room. He thought that maybe it was God's will, or maybe he had wanted to do this in the first place, but it didn't matter now. Franz II still had a kind smile when he entered Franz's room, but his face was very poor, and he looked worried. Franz didn't know what was going on. But judging from the news currently published in newspapers, the entire Austrian Empire is in a rare period of rise. Austria's fiscal revenue in 1833 was 130,269,877 florins, but in the first year of joining the German Zollverein, it rose to 146,120,349 florins, far exceeding the predictions of Count Korolov and the Ministry of Finance. A growth rate of 12% is enough to boast about. Politically, the loan firmly controlled the central and Italian countries in the hands of Austria, and the rulers of central Italy not only did not resent or be wary of hiring Austrian consultants to help manage the country, but felt that they did not have to pay. The money to support officials is earned by oneself. After joining the Germans Wolverine, Austria's position in the German Confederation became more stable. Even the small states that followed Prussia in the past turned to Austria again. In the last vote, Prussia was plotted by Austria. Since they could not find out who was the mole, the foreign minister died, and the Polish Restoration Army was causing trouble. Prussia also became suspicious domestically, because the nobles and capitalists of northern Italy also wanted to join the German customs union and get a share of the pie. They seemed extremely well behaved. The Hungarians are still busy fighting among themselves and will not make much action until the new boss is determined. Moreover, a new faction emerged in Hungary, namely the young nobles headed by Count Széchenyi. These people are usually not traditional aristocrats. Their industrial and commercial bourgeois attributes are destined to hope for open markets and free trade. Not only do they not oppose joining the German customs union, but they support Hungary's joining the German customs union. Factional warfare in Hungary became more intense with the addition of new factions. All in all, there is peace in the country. In recent years, France has first encountered a cholera pandemic, then natural disasters that reduced food production, and then a large-scale workers' uprising. Now cholera is spreading again in France. The Russians' target was still the Ottomans. As for Austria, they only sent some Slavophiles into the East Transylvania region to infiltrate and spread Slavonic ideas. The spread of Slavicism caused certain hidden dangers to the local area. The local garrison commander, General von Anton, immediately took thunderous measures, executing those who should be executed and expelling those who should be expelled. Although von Anton's actions were somewhat extreme, the Russians found nothing wrong with them. After all, their crime was to disrupt local security and did not mention the so-called Great Slavism. As a land power and a Mediterranean country, Austria posed almost no threat to the British, so it did not attract special attention from the British. The international environment is also changing in Austria's favor. Franz really couldn't think of anything that the old emperor had to worry about, and he saw that the old emperor was hesitant to speak. I had to say, "Grandpa, what's wrong with you?" "Grandpa, it's fine." Franz II smiled and continued, "Franz, would you like to answer Grandpa's question?" "Okay." Franz put down the newspaper in his hand, sat down and waited for the old emperor to ask questions. "Is Grandpa a good emperor?" "Of course Grandpa is a good emperor. Read the newspaper." After speaking, he picked up the newspaper and pointed to the news on it. Francis II took the newspaper and looked at it carefully. It all talks about how powerful the Austrian Empire is and how wise the emperor is. However, after seeing it, Francis II felt very gratified because no one had praised him for a long time. However, after taking a few more glances, I couldn't help but feel a little annoyed. The newspaper only wrote about the recent achievements of the Austrian Empire, but did not mention a word about the difficulties the Austrian Empire currently faced. However, looking back, Franz II's brows relaxed, and he was a little happy. Because in the newspapers, other surrounding countries were devalued as worthless. The French could not afford bread, the Prussians had no shoes to wear, and the Russians had to use people to cultivate the land. It seemed that everyone in the world, except the Austrian Empire, lived in dire straits. The Italian people, in particular, were simply eating out of the pot to welcome the king's master. These disgusting words did not affect Franz II's mood, nor did he feel ashamed. Instead, he ordered a royal steward to print more and make sure that every official in Austria would see it. Franz was a little ashamed, but he was very pleased that this time Prince Metternich's censorship system was in place. If you can still see things that are detrimental to Austria or the royal family in the newspapers supplied to the royal family, that would be Prince Metternich's dereliction of duty. Especially after joining the German customs union, Austria will be the focus of attention in the entire German region. Any small stain may be infinitely magnified, affecting national policies and even threatening rule. People can use newspapers to understand the country, but the emperor cannot rely on newspapers alone. Franz, I'm going to tell you the secret of becoming an emperor today. This is a secret that my grandfather only figured out after being the emperor for decades. The old emperor looked very expectant. Although Franz was a little surprised because he didn't think the old emperor was a successful emperor, he still decided to listen. After all, he didn't want to ruin the old emperor's interest. Franz second cleared his throat, took a deep breath, and tried his best to adjust his body to the best condition, being an emperor must have the air of a king, and the air of a king must not only be magnanimous and polite, but also courageous and responsible. If you don't understand, even if you are a barbaric tyrant, don't expose your dignity in front of others of weakness. Grandpa was a weak emperor, so Napoleon, Talleyrand, the French, the British, the Russians, the Prussians, the duplicitous ministers and the Hungarians, everyone was targeting me. Franz second looked a little excited, but then he laughed again. But one day, when I picked up the sword, they were all afraid of me. Afraid of me as the emperor, afraid of me rebuilding the Holy Roman Empire, afraid of me bullying them. No one dares to bully me and this country anymore. Now the entire country, everything is getting better, but it's a pity that grandpa realized it too late. Tears fell from the corners of Franz II's eyes as he continued, your uncle is not suitable to rule this country, and your father also lacks such talent. You must be the master of this country in the future. You must remember your grandfather's words. When you rebuild the Holy Roman Empire, you must let me buried with the title of Holy Roman Emperor. Franz was a little confused, but nodded. Francis II turned around and added, remember to have more children. Chapter 30 Zenla. The merchant ship stopped and went, and it took a lot of time along the way, but after 61 days of sailing, Ambrosius and his party finally arrived at their destination, Phnom Penh, the capital of Chenla. At this time, the speed of sailboats is mostly hovering around 12 knots. The clipper boats that will appear soon will bring the speed of sailboats to a new height of 20 knots. One section is equivalent to 1.85 kilometers, and sailing at a speed of 12 knots can cover 533.37 kilometers in one day. The total distance from Venice to Phnom Penh port is about 26,000 kilometers. In Rocha's eyes, it was an extremely noble thing to be able to return pagans to the correct faith. Because of this, Archbishop Rocha spared no effort to help Ambrosius. In order to ensure the safety of Ambrosius and the success of his missionary work, he also found a special religious group called the Battle Brotherhood. When Ambrosius first learned that there was such an organization in the Austrian church, he found it strange. However, the moment he boarded the ship, he finally understood why this group of people was called the Battle Brothers. The average height of this group of priests is more than 1.85 meters. In this era, when the average European person is 1.7 meters tall, the height of 1.85 meters can definitely be regarded as a legendary giant. What's even more exaggerated is that each of them carries rifles on their backs and cold weapons such as pistols and swords on their waists. If it weren't for the Bibles tied with iron chains around their waists, it would be difficult to distinguish them from the pastor. Connected together, these giant men all have fierce faces. It is better to say that they are priests than to say that they are more like executioners. Two of them were slightly shorter, but one of them was covered in scars, with a large area of burns on his face, and his voice was hoarse, like an evil ghost in hell. The other person, although he talks like a devout believer, actually has the Bible tattooed in Latin on his face. From a distance, he looks like an exorcist with spells all over his face. The priest's name was Sartor, an exorcist at the Holy See in Linz. Ambrosius sincerely lamented, Priest Sartor, even without the help of any holy weapons, can scare away devils just by his appearance. In this way, a general, 2 officers, a diplomat and translator, 17 adventurers, 3 missionaries and 50 combat priests embarked on the same journey. Except for the 2 adventurers, who unfortunately died at sea, the rest of the people arrived in Chenla safely. Phnom Penh, the capital of Chenla, is an inland port located in the delta between the Mekong River and the Tonle Sap River, with direct access to the South China Sea to the south. Although Ambrosius had long been mentally prepared. The city of Phnom Penh was still much bigger than he thought, almost twice the size of Florence, the capital of Tuscany. It's just that the people here seem a little numb. No matter where their group appeared in any city in Europe, Ambrosius had every reason to believe that they would attract onlookers, but this week, the workers in the port didn't seem to care about their arrival at all. They were carrying goods with dull eyes, as if they were a group of ghosts. The Vietnamese officials at the dock looked at Ambrosius and his party with disdain, as if they wanted to give them a good look. Ambrosius quickly took out a hanging zinc coin, handed it to the official, and spoke to him in broken Vietnamese. Congratulations on getting rich and living a long life. Zinc coins, also called white lead coins, actually contain more zinc and were the main currency in Vietnam at that time. The Vietnamese official at the port took the sling of money, put it in his pocket, and waved that they could leave. But when the missionaries passed by, the Vietnamese official stopped them and said, "Don't preach, or you will die." The Vietnamese official made a killing gesture, and the missionaries nodded to show their understanding. Before coming to Phnom Penh, the French captain had repeatedly reminded the Catholic priests that Emperor Minh of Vietnam had ordered a nationwide ban on preaching. Any priest who preached secretly would be arrested and sent to Hue. Anyone who helped him hide would be executed. But this is Chenla, so Vietnamese laws are not enforced very strictly. The accompanying diplomat Zaki gave the previous Vietnamese official another sling of money, wanting to know where the officials in Chenla were. After all, this was the port of Chenla. After the Vietnamese official got the money, he pointed to an inconspicuous hut nearby. After seeing Ambrosius and his party leaving, the Vietnamese official held up his bamboo hat and spat on the ground. A bunch of poor people are worthy of doing business with the Zenla people. At this time, the Vietnamese were very arrogant and believed that they were the second largest country in the world and had no rivals except the King dynasty. Ambrosius and his party entered the Foreign Affairs Office of Zenla, and Zenla officials stared at Ambrosius and his party curiously. Under the rule of Vietnam, the government offices in Chenla were in vain, and no one had come to visit them for a long time. Nguyen Jin Pen is a Chenla noble surname, and he is a second-grade civil servant, but under Vietnamese rule, he has almost no real power. Not only Nguyen Jin Pen, but other Chenla officials were also curious about the purpose of Ambrosius and his party. Because this team is so weird. And why are all these foreign monks armed? This figure, this appearance, is like the angry-eyed King Kong in the Buddhist hall. In addition, the Vietnamese now rule Chenla and implement Vietnamese laws. As long as there are missionaries who preach privately, they will be arrested and executed immediately, or sent to Hue for execution. Are these people really not afraid of death? But looking at these people, they don't look like they are here to preach. In fact, the so-called fighting brotherhood is just a product of the sorrow of the rabbit and the fox. After the French Revolution and the incident of the 12 priests, Catholic organizations in various countries were in constant panic, fearing that they would suffer the same fate. During the French Revolution, priests who refused to swear allegiance to the new French government were executed and frantically plundered church property. So a self-defense organization composed of fanatics came into being. They were originally used to protect Catholic property. However, these madmen got together and soon expanded their goals. One of them was to use force to protect missionaries. Safety. When Franz first heard about this organization, another name came to mind. Astartes. It was Franz who knew the existence of these Astartes who dared to let Ambrosius go to Chenla to save the princess. At this time, Ambrosius broke the silence first. "Hello, officials of Chenla. We are the special envoys of the Austrian Empire. We hope to establish diplomatic relations with Chenla and exchange information. We have brought gifts to your royal family and hope you can help us introduce them." Zaki, the diplomat who accompanied Ambrosius, took out small gold bars and handed them to Chenla officials. The Chenla officials immediately felt flattered and felt very kind to the foreigner in front of them who knew the Chenla language. But when they heard that the other party wanted to see the royal family, these officials looked at each other. Only Nguyen Jin Pen thought this was an opportunity, perhaps taking advantage of these foreigners' ignorance of the country's national conditions to make a fortune. "I am the general manager of the Chenla Foreign Affairs Office, Nguyen Jin Pen." Ambrosius also followed the example of Nguyen Jin Pen and announced his family name. "I am the Austrian Empire's special military observer, Ambrosius. I hope to visit the training and fighting of your army." At this time, a Chenla official jumped out and said, "You, a barbarian like you, really don't understand the rules. Why don't you kneel down when you see our official Mr. Jinpan? Kneel down." Ambrosius was a little confused. The Austrian diplomat Zucker on the side said with his face twitching twice, "Archduke, Ambrosius is a royal member of our Austrian Empire. Please pay attention to your attitude." Chapter 31 Night Attack. Guan Jinping was only briefly shocked, but he did not take this so-called member of the Austrian royal family to heart. After all, Austria was a name he had never heard of before, and it would not be better than the Dutch. Chenla had defeated the Dutch in the past. Although it was only a small army of the Dutch, after long-term propaganda, it has turned into a formation of the Chenla army and killed tens of thousands of red-haired ghosts. The remaining ones trampled on each other, and countless people fell into the sea. The Western Yi then came up to beg for surrender, and accepted it as their vassal tribute. In the eyes of Chenla people, the Qing dynasty, Vietnam, and Siam were the most powerful countries in the world, followed by Britain and France. Apart from the above 5 countries, Chenla had no rivals in the world. But for the sake of the gold bars given by the other party, Guan Jinping still told the truth. The Lord of our country, His Majesty Anzan, is not in the country. As for trade between the two countries, as long as you abide by the laws of our country and pay the tax burden, there will be no problem. Your Excellency Ambrosius, if you want to visit our Chenla army, I can arrangements for you." Then Guan Jinping looked at the foreign monks on the side and said, "The Lord of the Kingdom of Yu hates Western priests. You should do your own thing. Don't run around on the streets. If you have nothing to do, my people will arrange a post for you." Ambrosius wanted to try again to see if he could see the so-called princess. However, Ambrosius remembered that Franz reminded him not to act too hastily, so he decided to be patient for a while. After all, I'm here nominally as a military observer, not to pick up girls. He was just a little worried about the priests, but these battle brothers were not as manic as imagined. Instead, they bought a batch of local clothes and dressed themselves up as much as possible like the locals. A missionary named Passini told Ambrosius, "We people are not even afraid of death, so how can we be afraid of waiting? But Grand Duke, you are willing to risk your life and come with us. You are really a noble man." Ambrosius felt a little ashamed after hearing this. He didn't know how Father Passini would feel if he knew that he came here just to pick up girls. They hired another 20 coolies from the dock to help carry the gifts. When they arrived at the post house, they found that they could barely live here. Although the place was not small, there were only 4 post boys and a dozen handymen. The officials in charge of the post house had already just disappeared. But when their heavy salutes fell to the ground, the eyes of the postmen seemed to light up for a moment, and then they entered the half-dream state again. At night, everyone was already exhausted from the long journey, and fell into a deep sleep. Outside the courtyard wall, a hook lock was thrown up, and latched onto the edge of the wall. Then a figure climbed over the courtyard wall, and the figure went straight to the door latch at the back. The door bolt was removed, and a dozen masked men in black filed in with sharp swords afterwards. Under the command of a leader, they split up, and seemed to intend to catch everyone in the post house. The first man in black kicked open the door on one side, and before he could remember to shout out his lines, he was blown away by a powerful rifle. In fact, not everyone sleeps. There was an officer and 4 people responsible for the night's security work the night before and after. Firstly, it was a professional habit. Even on the ship, they did not relax their vigilance. Secondly, the eyes of those people were very strange. Thirdly, their most important responsibility was protected Archduke Ambrosius. The black shadow that climbed over the wall was discovered immediately, and then the entire team entered a state of combat readiness. With the first gunshot, the lights in the room turned on, and then dozens of rifles opened fire one after another. The people in black were defeated by the light and flying bullets. The battle ended in a very short time. The gunfire stopped, and the screams stopped immediately. Except for one of the 15 men in black who barely escaped by lying on the ground. The others were all killed by bullets. The satyr monk, whose face was covered with runes, picked up Lucky Man who was lying on the ground and threw him into the house. The man had not recovered from the battle just now. His body was shaking constantly, and the smell of urine came from his lower body. The officer on night duty slapped the man in black and knocked out 2 of his teeth. Who are you? Why do you do this? The man in black remained silent, and the officer raised his hand again. Master, Leon sent us here. Who is Leon? The officer continued to ask. The man in black hesitated. Another slap. It's the Vietnamese manager in charge of the dock. He took a fancy to your goods and asked us to pick them up. He also cut off the heads and sent them to you to claim credit. The man in black was named Yun Sheng, and he was just a minor official in Zenla. Because of the power of the Vietnamese, he helped Mr. Lee do such a thing. If he had known that the lives of his brothers would be at risk, he would never have accepted this job. The 2 slaps just now had already killed half of his life, so he simply confessed everything he knew. Asked Father Passini. So, kid, who are you? Yun Sheng knew that the person in front of him was a foreign monk. Compared with the fierce and vicious people around him, this foreign monk seemed much easier to talk to. He immediately said, as if grasping a life-saving straw, Master, Mage, my name is Yun Sheng. I'm just a 9th grade military officer from the Zenlo Kingdom. I beg you to be merciful and let me go. Father Passini shook his head. Child, the only one who can save you is yourself. Yun Sheng was confused by what this foreign monk said. Everyone around him understood Father Passini's intention, but looked at Yun Sheng helplessly, or with a sneer at this point. Yun Sheng was half coerced into joining the church. Father Passini was very happy and decided to open a bottle of red wine to celebrate. But soon the officers and soldiers of Zenla rushed over, and they couldn't help but feel ashamed when they saw the corpses on the ground. The leading officer looked at his dozens of men and mustered up his courage to say, how can you be so cruel and kill people at will? Ambrosius had just killed someone for the first time and had just recovered. Although his speaking skills were not very good, he could still tell that the other person was beating him up. Didn't you see that those people were armed? What did they want to do when they broke into our house at night? You foreigner are so cunning. Do you think that if you die without proof, I won't dare to arrest you? Come on. However, behind the officer, the uniformed officers and soldiers of Zenla did not dare to step forward to take him away. Instead, they were preparing to run away. After all, these officers and soldiers only had broadswords and spears in their hands, while the ones on the opposite side were holding blunderbuss. Zenla was very backward at this time, and a battalion of officers and soldiers was already pretty good with a few blunderbuss. Even the equipment rate of Vietnamese blunderbuss is very low, and the main weapon is still a cold weapon. Moreover, most of these cannons are crudely made, and the probability of injuring the enemy is almost as high as that of self-injury. Father Passini, who is familiar with officialdom in Southeast Asia, spoke again. You are the officers and soldiers of Zenla, right? We are the guests of your lord, Lord Jinping. The Zenla officer immediately breathed a sigh of relief and put on a smiling face. It turns out that he is a guest of Lord Guan Jinping. We will definitely investigate this matter and give you justice. Then he ordered his men, carry the body away, and the remaining people will stand guard for me. If any of the young people disturb the rest of the distinguished guests, I will take it from you. Inside the station house, they also call them soldiers? Ambrosius roared. Grand Duke Ambrosius, isn't this good? As military observers, one is to learn advanced tactics, and the other is to understand the opponent's strength. Isn't it because the higher-ups sent us here to prepare for the establishment of colonies in the future? Another officer also strongly agreed. They did not consider economic and political considerations, but simply felt that the European powers had colonies, and the Austrian Empire should also have its own colonies. The surrounding Catholic priests also thought so. After all, it was much easier to preach in the colonies than to hide in Tibet. Ambrosius sighed and lamented how he met this group of madmen. There were only a few dozen people in total who wanted to establish a colony. Ambrosius thought of the brat in Vienna again, and cursed in his heart. Where's the promised princess? Chapter 30. To the dead are like this. Francis II's condition suddenly worsened, and as he lay dying he summoned his 3 brothers and Prince Metternich to his side. Archduke Louis announced the will of Francis II. Francis II's personal property was divided into 3 parts, One part was left to his eldest son, and the rest was given to his second son and eldest grandson. Franz Joseph received land and estates worth 2.6 million florins, as well as all the palaces and estates of the Elthach family in Austria, as well as a well-equipped dragoon regiment. Francis II left 100,000 florins to Archduke John, and gave him instructions: "My brother, you are no longer a member of the royal family. You can no longer spend money as you did in the past. After all, this is the last money that my brother can provide. Archduke John is a celebrity in the royal family. It's not because he studied music with Beethoven, it's not because he did business with the Rothschild family, it's not because he fought with Napoleon, and because of personal reasons. Archduke Carol's strategy failed, and he successfully let Napoleon go. But this Archduke John did not love the country but the beauty, so he gave up his right to inherit the throne and his royal status to marry the daughter of a commoner. He also defaulted on bank loans for a long time, and was blacklisted by many banks. However, Archduke John can be said to be the traffic king of Austria, and he always attracts widespread public attention, so his reputation among the people is not bad. Franz II gave a coin to Archduke Carol, which was the money Franz II won from Archduke Carol when he was a child. Archduke Carol has always been resentful about this, not because of the wealthy Archduke Carol's coin, but because he did not want to lose to Francis II. Franz II was unwilling to return the coin to Archduke Carol, because it was a trophy won by Franz II and Archduke Carol. Archduke Charles was very good, and this coin was Francis II's only trophy. But because of this, the two brothers have been at odds for decades. Today Francis II returned the coin to Archduke Charles, who accepted it. This means that the two brothers have turned their hostility into friendship and both have let go. As for Francis II's younger brother, Archduke Louis, he did not have any gifts. He just told Archduke Louis, "You are a good man, my brother. Thank you for your hard work over the years. You must live a good life. My descendants will be entrusted to you." After saying this, Archduke Louis was already crying. He did not have the military talent of Archduke Carol, nor the communicative skills of Archduke John. He only did one thing in his life, and that was to guard his brother. "You are a good man." There is no better compliment for Archduke Louis than these words at the end. Franz II opened a box and found 4 identical wills. "This is my last request, everyone. You are all my brothers, friends, and guardians of the Habsburg family. I hope you can keep a secret for me. My eldest son Ferdinand is not suitable to rule this country, but the family has family rules, and as a patriarch, I cannot break this sacred tradition. But times are changing, and some rules should also change, so I want you to do one thing. After Franz completes his coming of age ceremony at the age of 18, make this will public. He is a good boy and will definitely become a good emperor in the future. You have to help him and respect him, just like you do to me. The future of the family in this country is in your hands." March 2, 1835. Francis II, the last emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, the founder of the Austrian Empire, and the leader of the Habsburg family, passed away suddenly. The flow of time will not stop at all because of someone's death. Franz Joseph accepted this reality calmly, but he still felt sad for the grandfather with whom he had been living day and night for 5 years. When Talia heard the news, she was so sad that she fainted. As a person with a modern soul, it is difficult to understand what kind of feelings ordinary people in the old era had towards the emperor. The emperor died, and all Austria was immersed in sorrow. Even the busiest streets in Austria have become quiet. People spontaneously took out candles and took to the streets to pray for the old emperor. You must know that light sources at this time are not cheap, and many people are reluctant to light up at night. These candles and kerosene lamps were most likely their only source of light. At this time, standing at the highest point of the palace, overlooking Vienna, the candlelight was connected together, and the quiet candlelight moved slowly. Spectacular and sad. The death of the old emperor represents the end of an era, and the biggest problem facing Austria is the death of the people and the government. Ferdinand I was crowned emperor of the Austrian Empire in Vienna, and the royal advisors headed by Karl von Slot immediately became arrogant and domineering. The first thing they had to do was to stop all railway construction in the Austrian Empire. They produce countless evidence that railways would threaten human existence. The reasons are absolutely ridiculous, such as the black smoke from the trains would spread pneumonia throughout Austria. The human respiratory system cannot withstand speeds exceeding 15 km per hour. Once this speed is exceeded, a person's lungs will collapse, the circulatory system will become disordered, and even blood will fly out of the body. There will be no grass growing on both sides of the railway. Cows that see the train passing by will not be able to produce milk, and hens will not be able to lay eggs. Of course, all parties in Austria who have invested a lot of capital in the railway will not agree with their views. As a result, Karl von Slote's opinions were magnificently ignored, and he had no real power in his hands. However, in order to establish his personal prestige, he asked the Austrian government to immediately withdraw the loans it had given to various countries in China and Italy to repay the debts of the Austrian Empire. This was also a bad move, but fortunately the Austrian officials refused to carry out the orders of Slote, the royal advisor. A furious Karl von Slote ordered the dismissal of all the emperor's advisors, including Friedrich List. Friedrich List was very angry at Karl von Slote's arrogant attitude, and Friedrich List had made enough money and was worried about leaving Austria and getting rid of Metternich's shadow. Just after receiving the dismissal order from Ferdinand I, he packed up his finances and ran away with his family overnight. As soon as Friedrich List left Vienna, he received invitations from Prussia, Saxony, and Bavaria. Friedrich List chose Prussia without hesitation, because having worked in the center of the Austrian Empire, he knew very well that in the entire German Confederation, only Prussia could compete with Austria. Chapter 33. Lose some weight. Vienna. Since Thalia had recently eaten a large meal and her fat content had increased, Franz decided to supervise her weight loss. Thalia's hands were supporting the ground, and Franz put his legs on Thalia's waist while reading the newspaper. As a teacher, you have to set an example. If you are so fat, it will affect the image of the royal family. Damn it, I'm not a pet teacher. Thalia was obviously very reluctant, but the pillow is too soft, which will affect the quality of sleep, Franz said casually, his attention still on the newspaper due to the crazy investment in Austrian railways. The problem of insufficient pig iron production in Austria was directly exposed. When business opportunities arise, businessmen will naturally not sit idly by. Within 1 year, 10 more steel plants were built in Austria. It is expected that within 1 or 2 years, it will surpass Prussia. Of course, there is still a big gap between Britain and France. But this is a good start for Austria's industrialization. After the death of the old emperor, the entire Austrian Empire fell into chaos. In order to relieve his boredom, Franz continued to tease Thalia. As the royal family's tutor, you must be self-disciplined. You don't have to say it, I know it. Thalia replied angrily. After all, no girl likes to hear others say she is fat. This helps you strengthen your core strength. In addition, push-ups can also improve your body shape. It can perfectly shape the muscle lines of your shoulders, back and upper limbs. After a while, her face was wet with sweat, and her arms were shaking uncontrollably. Franz knew that she had reached her limit, so he moved his legs away. Take a rest and don't force yourself. Why don't you do it? Thalia, who had just done 20 push-ups, asked angrily. Because I'm better than you. I do not believe. Franz lay on the ground and did 20 push-ups with one hand. Thalia was stunned. In fact, the lighter you are, the easier it is to do push-ups. Franz's child's body is still very advantageous. Franz smiled at Thalia, whose jaw dropped. Fat Thalia. News of Francis II's death soon reached Prussia, and William III almost fainted with joy. Because he believed that Austria, led by an idiot, could not compare with his Prussia. Equally happy are the Russians are in the French cabinet. After all, the recent strong rise of the Austrian Empire has made them sit on pins and needles. The death of Francis II, who had ruled the Austrian Empire for 40 years, and the accession of the mentally retarded Ferdinand I to the throne, would undoubtedly have a huge impact on everything in the Austrian Empire. No one knows how much impact this shock will have on Austria. They only know that the newly appointed royal chief advisor frantically fired all the former emperor's advisors. Austrian powerful figures such as Prince Metternich and Korolov had to personally invite Baron Bruck back, to continue presiding over Austria's debt issue. As for Ferdinand I's ascension to the throne, some ministers also raised objections to whether Archduke Franz Karl, who was slightly ill, could be allowed to ascend the throne. However, this will has been recognized by the Habsburg family. Royal orders cannot be changed, so these people have no choice but to accept their fate. They didn't know where Austria's broken ship would sail. Franz read Ambrosius's letter and felt that there was no need to be anxious. If he could not see the princess, they can completely regard the trip to Chenla as a tourist vacation. Of course Ambrosius can think so, but the Catholic priests will not agree. So Franz proposed to establish a base first, and as an excuse, he would use it to help the army suppress bandits. Don't go to Phnom Penh port, because that is the sphere of influence of the Vietnamese. You can go to Kampong Som, later Sihanoukville port. At this time, Kampong Som was just a small, inaccessible fishing village. The lower the education level, the easier it was to preach. When you have established a foothold in Kampong Som, the royal family of Chenla will contact you. Chenla, port of Phnom Penh. The news that Ambrosius and his party killed 14 bandits in the night spread like wildfire. Bandits were rampant in Phnom Penh city, and the government and army were helpless. The sound of Ambrosius and his party using rifles was even considered to be thunder. So this rumor is changing in the direction of foreign monks learning witchcraft. Guan Jinping also learned the news. While he ordered the rumor to be blocked, he started to arrange Ambrosius's itinerary. Guan Jinping realized that these people were not lambs to be slaughtered, but beasts with sharp fangs. But he didn't understand why such a group of people would travel thousands of miles to Chenla to be military observers. Guan Jinping only thought he was a Westerner and wanted to learn advanced technology, but he felt something was wrong. He doesn't want to care so much, now he just wants to give these people a blow. Let them see the most powerful soldiers in the world. The Zenla Forbidden Army. Outside Phnom Penh, there is the main campus of the Imperial Army in Chenla. This is the school grounds of Chenla's strongest army, the Forbidden Army. Their duty is to protect the royal family. Ironically, the royal family is now controlled by the Vietnamese, and King Anzan is not even in the royal palace in Phnom Penh. The Vietnamese also tailored the Chenla Forbidden Army, stipulating that the number of the Forbidden Army could not exceed 3,000, and they could not be equipped with iron armor. Even so, the Chenla Forbidden Army still retains their last dignity. This force has never given up training, and is definitely the strongest force in Chenla at this time. The weather in Chenla is humid and hot all year round, but the Imperial soldiers are still fully armed. They let out loud roars, used their swords vigorously, and thrust their spears with all their strength, the spear points almost cutting through the air. Hang Bufu, the commander-in-chief of the Forbidden Army, was very satisfied with the performance of his soldiers, but it was a pity that the country was in decline and had no way to serve the country. Official Jin Pan was also very moved. Every time he came to the Forbidden Army campus, he would lament that if His Majesty could return to China and cheer up, there would be no need to worry about capturing the East and West. Referring to Vietnam and Siam, however, none of this seemed to attract the attention of the foreign young man in front of him. Guan Jinping decided that he could only use his trump card. He looked at the commander of the Forbidden Army. The latter also understood what the director of the Foreign Affairs Office meant, but he was a little worried about the bullets. Hang Bufu, the commander-in-chief of the Forbidden Army, gave an order, and 4 rows of soldiers holding blunderbuss ran over. Just 50 steps away from the soldiers is a straw man with 50 straws, with a watermelon for the head. Drug. The Imperial Guard soldiers began to introduce gunpowder into the barrel of the gun. Send. Medicine. The Imperial Guards pounded the gunpowder into the barrel, putting lead. After more than 10 commands, Hang Bufu finally gave the order. Ignition. The 50 Zenla Imperial Guards in the first rolled at the match ropes, but because these match ropes were of different lengths and materials, finally, when the gun was fired, it sounded chaotic. As for these gunmen, who can only fire 3 rounds a year, their hit rate is very poor, and only 10 watermelons were blown up. Seeing the watermelon being beaten everywhere, Guan Jinping and Hang Bufu could not help but shout. Seeing that the 2 superior officers were so happy, the Imperial Guards also cheered together, thinking that their arrears of salary had also been settled. A total of 4 rounds of shooting, 200 rounds knocked out more than 30 watermelons. Guan Jinping looked at Ambrosius hoping to see emotions such as surprise, fear, or admiration in the other person's eyes, but Ambrosius only saw disappointment and disdain in his eyes. But Guan Jinping still asked the question he had always wanted to ask: does our powerful army of great Zenla have any rivals in Europe? Chapter 34 Transaction. Guan Jinping's question was difficult for Ambrosius to answer. The Chenla people used an old-fashioned matchlock gun from the 16th century, which was designed by the Portuguese at that time. Now the major European powers have eliminated matchlocks, and even flintlock guns are being eliminated by more advanced percussion guns, usually called percussion guns. Even in a backward country like Russia, the matchlock gun has been eliminated. Matchlock guns are still used today, probably only in small states in Italy and Germany. In fact, due to Ambrosius's knowledge, he believed that the matchlock had already withdrawn from the battlefield. In fact, matchlocks are still very popular throughout Italy, except for the northern Italian region controlled by Austria. During the Spanish Civil War during the same period, both sides were still equipped with a large number of matchlocks. In the more backward Balkans, soldiers without matchlocks even had to equip themselves with cold weapons such as bows, arrows, and spears. He picked up his rifle and retreated 150 paces away. Boom. With the sound of a gunshot, a watermelon shattered. When it comes to cleaning, changing, applying medicine, and loading ammunition, Ambrosius is obviously much more skilled than the Zenla Forbidden Army. After all, in the Austrian Empire, with his status, he could practice shooting at will. It took about half a minute for the second bullet to smash another watermelon 150 steps away. Although Ambrosius had practiced a lot, he was not a professional shooter after all, but he thought this distance was enough to scare the arrogant Zenra in front of him. In fact, Ambrosius took advantage. He used a rifled gun. Although loading was slower, the shooting accuracy was much higher than that of a smoothbore gun. At this time, Han Bufu was so surprised that he could not open his mouth from ear to ear. He knew that 150 steps was 3 times the shooting range of the Zenla Forbidden Army just now. Even the best gunslinger in the Zenla Forbidden Army couldn't hit 2 hits at this distance. However, neither Han Bufu nor Guan Jinping realized that this was the difference in weapons, and immediately praised it. Amazing and miraculous skills. Amazing and miraculous skills. Magnificent. Lord Ambrosius, it really opened our eyes. Ambrosius didn't quite understand, but he knew that the other party was very satisfied with his demonstration just now. Ever since, Ambrosius had a new idea, which was to sell all the obsolete flintlocks of the Austrian Imperial Army to this group of people. Yes, this is the latest product of our Austrian Empire. With this gun, you can do it too. We are willing to trade with you. We not only have guns, but also artillery. And, before Ambrosius finished speaking, he was interrupted by Guan Jinping. Wait a minute, you mean you're just good at firearms? I don't believe it. Is there anyone in Austria who can shoot more accurately than you? Of course, Captain Bielefen. You show me, Captain. Bielefen was born as a chasseur, and his first chasseur battalion in Tyrol was the most powerful unit in Austria. Bielefen, who was born as a civilian, can become an officer, so he naturally has abilities beyond ordinary people. And shooting was one of his special skills. Bielefen took the rifle and inspected it. First he shot on the spot and hit a watermelon. Then he took 50 steps back and shot a second time and hit a watermelon again. Then another 50 steps, and then another 50 steps. 4 out of 4 shots, from a distance of up to 300 steps, made Han Bufu unable to believe his eyes. He was born in the military, and naturally understood what kind of powerful strength this was. If the Forbidden Army under him has this kind of strength, and is equipped with 5,000 rifles, there is nothing to fear, even if Vietnam sends 100,000 troops. Guan Jinping also knew from Han Bufu's expression that this firearm was crucial to the Forbidden Army. How much money does a gun like this cost? 50 taels. This was a price Ambrosius thought was reasonable, based on intelligence. However, Ambrosius forgot that the unspoken rule of Eastern officialdom was to ask for high prices and pay back the money. 20 taels. Guan Jinping replied without blushing or heartbeat point, but he knew he was making a lot of money point, because the guns sold by the Qing dynasty to the Vietnamese cost 30 taels, while the French sold them to the Vietnamese for 25 taels. The gun-making craftsmen of Zenla had long been conscripted and taken away by the Vietnamese point. Now Chenla can only buy firecrackers from the Vietnamese at a high price. And the price of the firecrackers sold by the Vietnamese to Chenla's army is exactly 50 taels. The young man in front of me seems to know nothing about business. He should be able to win it with 25 taels. Guan Jinping thought so, and his eyebrows were filled with joy. Ambrosius realized that he was wrong and should not tell the other party the bottom line. In fact, Father Passini had already learned the price of the gunpowder sold by the Vietnamese to the Chenla army through the local Catholic secret network and informed Ambrosius. But Ambrosius naively believed that, as long as he named a reasonable price, the other party would immediately agree to the deal. It seems that some of the income is going to be lost, so it must be made up from elsewhere. No, 20 taels is too little. 50 taels is our bottom line. Our goods have to travel more than 20,000 kilometers to arrive. Then, 25 taels, no more. Guan Jinping made a sarcastic expression. 40 taels. You let us establish a supply point in Kampong Som Bay. Ambrosius took the opportunity to state his conditions and left room for Guan Jinping. For 25 taels, I can not only help you set up a supply point at the seaside, but also allow you to meet members of the royal family. Guan Jinping said, It is Majesty Anson? Ambrosius asked. No, it's our Princess of Zenla. Guan Jinping told him, because he had to negotiate this business, because the Vietnamese rule is strengthening step by step. According to this situation, Vietnam will annex Chenla sooner or later. As a great nobleman of Chenla, he is bound to be the primary target of elimination by the Vietnamese. Even if he surrenders, the Vietnamese may not let him go. From the reduction policy implemented by the Vietnamese, it is clear that the Vietnamese hope to completely disappear Chenla from the world. The Siamese, like the Vietnamese, are both tigers and wolves and cannot be trusted. Guan Jinping is a wealthy family in Zenla. There are thousands of people in the family. Even if he can escape, his family cannot escape. Rather than being a lamb waiting to be slaughtered, it is better to give it a try. The arrival of Ambrosius and his weapons at this time was like a life-saving straw for Guan Jinping. Most of the wealthy families in Chenla had the same idea. They secretly united, contacted the rebels, and secretly accumulated strength. This is also an important reason why in history, after the Vietnamese Emperor Minh Minh executed the Anson family, the large-scale anti-Vietnamese uprising in Chenla was able to continue. 30 taels. Ambrosius's two goals for this trip have been achieved, and now he only hopes to earn more benefits for Austria. Make a deal. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 35 The Seed of the Future. Vienna, Schönbrunn Palace. Franz was lying on Thalia's lap, listening to her read the newspaper. The price of land in the United States has gradually become outrageous, which Franz expected. But what Franz didn't expect was that this land craze was gradually developing from the east coast of the United States to the west. This makes Franz a little confused, because in Franz's plan, the American pig can cut several crops at this time. Every piece of land sold by the US government is sold at a premium. Even so, the buyer will make a lot of money within a few days. Fortunately, the American war to expel the Indians prevented the real estate craze from spreading to the west. Otherwise, Franz would have to consider whether to buy land in the west more than 10 years in advance. The UK had a huge wheat harvest, which led to dumping of wheat everywhere in the UK, causing the price of wheat to plummet by 40%. Austria also had a bumper wheat harvest. Fortunately, the German customs union and Italy could dump it, but Hungary was in dire straits. Hungary's wheat suddenly lost its market, which also caused a large number of landowners to switch to other crops to make up for the shortfall. The consequences would be seen a few years later. The Imperial faction represented by SHNIE had the upper hand. Historically, Hungary's royal faction had always had the upper hand point. However, due to Prince Alfred's sudden loss of power and Austria's successful entry into the German customs union, the original royalist faction suffered serious losses, while at the same time strengthening the imperialist faction. Imperialists, they support Austria's rule in Hungary, hope that Austria and Hungary will be fully integrated, and believe that Hungary's departure from Austria is tantamount to self-destruction. The best way to safeguard its own rights and interests is to let the empire see the value of Hungary. Most of these people belong to Hungary's emerging aristocrats and capitalists, as well as the great aristocrats who have lived in Austria for a long time and identify with Austrian culture. Royalists, they demand autonomy, put Hungary's interests first in everything, hope to rebuild the Kingdom of Hungary, and draw a clear line with Austria. These people considered the Austrians to be robbers who had taken away their property and kingdom. The power of the Hungarians must be in the hands of the Hungarians. The Hungarians should not work for Austria or the Habsburg family. Austria and the Habsburg family should repay their debts to Hungary. Some of these people were traditional landed aristocrats who held large amounts of land in their hands, and many of them lived in Vienna and Paris. They had their own territory in Hungary and could control taxation, justice, and even organize the army. These big nobles opposed Austria more, just to gain more benefits. The main supporters of the kingdom faction are the so-called single-clothed aristocrats. Single-clothed aristocrats refer to those who are poor and have only one piece of clothing to wear except for one noble status. These people are extremely poor, eager to change the status quo, and want to achieve a class jump by violently seizing power. Austrian explorer Costa will organize a team to explore the Amazon rainforest to find the mysterious kingdom hidden deep in the rainforest. He is now looking for philanthropists to sponsor, and the profit distribution can be discussed in detail. This news caught Franz's attention, and Franz didn't care about the mysterious kingdom in the rainforest. As far as Franz knew, there were only some indigenous tribes inside, and there were no treasures. What Franz wants is the seed of a plant, the seed that will change the world in the future. Talia, can you contact this explorer? Legends are all lies. If you have too much money to spend, you can consider improving the food. Thalia lowered her head and said to Franz, I don't want any treasure, I want the seeds of a plant. Plants? There are no plants in the royal greenhouse. Are they edible? Thalia asked. Ahem, no. But it is said that it is a plant that sheds tears. Don't you want to see it? Franz tried to arouse Thalia's interest. Wouldn't a plant that sheds tears affect people's mood? When you hear it, you can tell that it is a sad plant, and it cannot be eaten. Talia complained. Haven't you ever heard of basing your own happiness on the pain of others? Franz said. Archduke. Franz, you are wrong. You cannot base your happiness on the pain of others. Thalia said. Now that I can't see the weeping plant, I'm in pain. If I'm in pain, I want to build my own happiness on the pain of others. Franz pinched Thalia's thighs. He said it one time. Thalia begged for mercy. Okay, you convinced me. Now can you tell me, what do you want those rubber seeds for? If you like to play pool, ivory ones are better. The rubber ones are too soft. Franz had bad memories of playing pool, having to be carried while playing because he was too short. It's not good at all to feel like you're being used as a pillow and have no autonomy at all. Zenla, Sun. When Ambrosius arrived in Kampong Som, he felt that he had been deceived. This place was not a port, it was obviously a fishing village. The surrounding Chenla people looked at Ambrosius and his party with horrified eyes. The ancestors of these local people were not fishermen, but honest farmers. However, Vietnam and Siam invaded one after another, causing the fields to become barren and the people to make a living. The Chenla government used force to resist the invasion of Vietnam and Siam, but instead colluded with bandit bullies and intensified the exploitation of the people. In order to survive, their ancestors ran to this uninhabited beach and became fishermen. Guanjin Panguan still had some authority, and he immediately gave an order, scaring the local petty officials so much that they sat on the ground. This place will be under the command of An Kyan Hu from now on. Don't be too meddlesome, or you may lose your head. It was the first time for the local officials to see the second grade Dalan and they also heard that the 5th grade 1000 households were surnamed An, so they were naturally connected with the national surname point. As for the emperor's relatives, why did they come to this remote country? After thinking about it, the junior officer easily came to the conclusion that this man with the surname Guo looked so weird, he was probably driven out of Phnom Penh point. Now the official figured it out and immediately shut up. There were not many people in his place anyway, so Nkainu could do whatever he wanted point. Although Ambrosius was dissatisfied, these Catholic priests were extremely happy. They did not expect to gain a foothold so easily. This was a big step for the church in Southeast Asia point. You know, the French came here, the Spanish came here, and the Dutch came here, but they didn't even leave a church, let alone a stronghold point. Moreover, once the Austrian Empire establishes a port here, they will be able to preach in Chenla with peace of mind point. These Catholic priests have told their colleagues about Kampong Som along the way, and they believe that Catholics in Chenla will soon come to Kampong Som to settle down point. The 2 officers brought by Ambrosius were also very happy. After all, this was considered a small colony. They might be recorded in history as the first colonists in the history of the Austrian Empire point. Only diplomat Zucker was worried about Zhang Song, because he knew that Austria had neither plans nor the strength to expand in Southeast Asia at this time point. An additional update for Pyongyang Daofen and Shenzhou Wuxiangsha, who are celebrating their birthdays. Chapter 36 Past events in Phnom Penh. Phnom Penh, the official residence of the Jin family point. Sitting in front of a square table were some of the most powerful Chenla people in the Chenlo kingdom. On the left were Zisu, the director of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, and Deng Changbu, the director of punishments. Sitting on the right are Jinji, the chief trade officer, and Jinpan, the chief officer of the Foreign Affairs Office point. Sitting north and facing south, the old man wearing purple robe in the middle is named Perisu. He is the Prime Minister of Zenla point. Opposite the old man was Han Bufu, the Commander-in-Chief of the Zenla Forbidden Army point. Perisu spoke first. Since everyone can gather together today, I won't say any more. My heart for Zenla is not dead when the people of you are killed. In the name of suppressing the rebellion, I'm actually reducing my population. I'm destroying my city and plundering my people. The governor of Che and the entire Kiraha clan has been wiped out. If we continue to allow the you people to act recklessly, what happens to Kiraha today will be what happens to us tomorrow. Deng Changbu, the chief punishment officer, slapped the table hard and sighed helplessly. Where is the king's law, and where is the law of heaven? Isn't Ruan you afraid of the Buddha's appearance and the consequences of reincarnation? Most people in Chenla and Vietnam believe in Buddhism. Zisuji, the director of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, hated waiting for Deng Changbu to show weakness, and did not believe official Jinpan, so he said, at this time, do you still expect the Buddha to appear? Let's study how to save ourselves. Master Guan Jinpan, are the ZIEU said reliable? Are you afraid that the French, the lackeys of the Vietnamese, are pretending to be special to deceive us? The French once funded the Vietnamese, but after the Vietnamese became strong, they began to suppress the French everywhere, so the Chenla people mistakenly believed that the French were a slave state of the Vietnamese. No, their languages are different, and I heard from Western businessmen that the Austrians are the mortal enemies of the French. Guan Jinpan replied. Zisu naturally understood that the enemy of an enemy is a friend, and continued to ask, are their firearms really that powerful? How are they compared to our blunderbuss? Han Bufu, the commander-in-chief of the Forbidden Army, said, awesome. Compared with the new style foreign guns, our blunderbuss is a fire stick. The new style foreign guns shoot fast and accurately, and are so powerful that they are useless even under iron armor and rattan armor. The best thing is that they are not afraid of moisture. Don't be afraid of not being able to light it. The climate in Chinla is hot and humid, and the lead of the matchlock gun is easily affected by moisture, which seriously affects shooting. Flintlock guns have been developed for hundreds of years in this era, and the granulated black powder brought by Ambrosius is not comparable to traditional black powder. Granular gunpowders are in granular form, so they will not stick together even when squeezed by the bar, while black powder is more likely to become a lump from the combination of force and moisture. The gaps left between the particles of gunpowder allow oxygen to assist the combustion of the gunpowder, making the burning rate more uniform and improving the efficiency of gunpowder combustion. When the gunpowder is fired, a considerable part of the unignited gunpowder is ejected out of the barrel, so its power is greatly increased. It's just that the officials in Chinla didn't understand this, although Zissou was unwilling to give in. He believed in Han Bufu, the commander-in-chief of the Forbidden Army. If it weren't for the commander-in-chief's presence, the wealthy families in Phnom Penh would have been wiped out by Giang Ming. Giang Ming Gio was the close general of Emperor Minming of Vietnam. He was named the governor of Chenla by Emperor Minming and implemented the policy of extermination and assimilation in Chenla. The old man in the middle spoke again. But 100 taels of silver is really too expensive. No matter how good the Yi weapons are, we can't afford to buy them. If we only buy a few thousand, they may not be useful. Ruan Yu has an army of 100,000. Your Excellency Ambrosius has 3 conditions. Tell me the story. I have arranged for people to allocate a piece of land for them to live in. Well, that's right. Our land in Zenla is vast and rich in resources. Not to mention the land of a village. I can even afford the land of a county. The old man nodded. He didn't think there was any point in setting aside land in Zenla for foreigners to live, as long as just pay the tax. They also hope to build churches to worship their ancestors. It's natural for people to miss their hometown and worship their ancestors. It seems that these Western Yi people are not uncultured people. Their leader wants to see Her Royal Highness the Princess. Damn it. How dare the barbarians be so rude? This is the greatest absurdity in the world. How can Princess Feng'an be seen by these foreign barbarians? The old man was so angry that his hair and beard were all red. But the others here were not too angry. Now, His Majesty Anzan is still in the hands of the Vietnamese. If we can welcome His Majesty back, not only to meet the princesses, but also to let the princesses get married. Jinji, the trade manager who had been silent, said. Prime Minister Palasu wanted to reprimand this lawless bastard, but everyone around him fell silent, seeming to acquiesce to Guan Jinji's statement. Palasu thought about it. The country was going to perish, so what use were these etiquettes? How many taels can we get cheaper if we agree to these 3 conditions? 30 taels. Guan Jinpan replied. The old man thought for a moment and then said, tell them that we can allocate a county to them, but the foreign guns will cost 50 liang apiece and sell them to us. I will try my best to live up to the Prime Minister and live up to Zenla. Guan Jinpan replied calmly. Night, Phnom Penh, Don Kio restaurant. Then, now I ask everyone who has money and ability to contribute to fight the national crisis. Perasu raised his glass and drank it all in one gulp. I'm Prime Minister Zenla. Let's start with me. I will contribute 200,000 taels. 200,000 taels is definitely a very big number in Chenla. You must know that due to the exploitation of the Vietnamese, the Chenla treasury can only receive 30,000 to 50,000 taels of silver every year, and it cannot even afford the salaries of soldiers and officials. At this time, the Qing dynasty had 40 million taels. Palasu really showed all his secrets, but because the number was so scary, no one responded for a long time. Everyone's arms were numb, and they looked at each other, waiting for the next person to express their opinion. Guan Jinpan couldn't stand it anymore, and drank all the wine in one gulp. I am willing to give you 10,000 taels of silver and 10,000 hu of rice, although Guan Jinpan is a second-rank official in Zenla, and Guan Jin's family is a wealthy family in Zenla. This number is really quite a lot for his family. Then Guan Jinji also drank the wine in one gulp. I am the same as my elder brother, with 10,000 taels of silver and 10,000 hu of rice. After Guan Jinji finished speaking, he hugged Guan Jinpan and cried, because this was almost all the assets that their family could use, and any more would have to be sold off. Later, Zissou, the director of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, also offered 5,000 taels, and Hong Bufu, the commander-in-chief of the Forbidden Army, offered 1,000 taels. After that, it became outrageous. These businessmen, officials, landowners, and gentlemen gave you 200 and me 300. The most outrageous thing was that Deng Changbu, the chief executioner, only paid 50 taels. This made Palace very angry, because Deng Changbu accepted more than 200 taels of bribes at a time. He said tremblingly, "You are a bunch of worms. The country is in such a state of decline that you can't go into battle to kill the enemy, so why don't you want to contribute some of your family wealth? Deng Changbu, why do you, the chief executioner, only contribute 50 taels?" Deng Changbu also had a reason, and said with great disdain, "My annual salary should be 150 taels, but now they give me 20 taels every year. I have been an official for 17 years, and Zenla still owes me 2,200 taels." Palasu was so angry that he almost fainted. He deeply understood the helplessness of Master Changsun back then. Chapter 37 Taking Kickbacks. The royalists in Chenla and the landowners and merchants who opposed the Vietnamese finally raised 350,000 taels of silver and prepared to purchase 6,000 rifles from Austria at a price of 300,000 taels. Ambrosius and the 2 officers accompanying him were very satisfied with the price of 180,000 taels, because in Austria these flintlocks could only be disposed of for 15 florins, approximately 10.5 taels, and most of the guns disposed of will go to Austria's enemies or rebels. The diplomat Zacher had already drawn up the agreement, and Ambrosius pressed the seal happily. However, Jinpan, the official who read the contract, was shocked, because it clearly stated in the contract that Zenla purchased 6,000 flintlock muskets from the Austrian military at a price of 30 taels each, totaling 80,000 taels. Guan Jinpan originally planned to tear up the contract, but who knew it would be in 5 copies. Guan Jinpan was struck by lightning and immediately asked if he could modify the unit price and total price in the contract. Ambrosius did not react for a moment, but diplomat Zacher understood the key and spoke righteously. "We, in the Austrian Empire, have a very strict censorship system. The Emperor, the Ministry of Finance, and the Prime Minister's office must keep this contract for review. If we write 300,000 taels on the contract, then we must hand over the same amount. Otherwise it would be considered corruption. The principles of the law are nothing more than human feelings. Please be accommodating." Guan Jinpan said with a smile, "I'm willing to give you 20,000 taels of silver as a gift. But I heard that your salary is only a few hundred taels a year. It is really wronging you." Ambrosius and Zacher looked at each other, but they both refused to accept it. After all, this crime was too big. Guan Jinpan absolutely cannot accept this result. If the matter is revealed, Zenla will no longer have a place for him. If he gives up on this deal, he will ruin the future of this country and his family. While Guan Jinpan was hesitating, Father Pasini interrupted, "Lord Guan Jinpan, if you can let me enter the palace and become the princess's teacher, I can consider it and help you convince them." Guan Jinpan could neither give up the transaction nor let himself be ruined, so he had to agree to Pasini's request. Father Pasini immediately pulled Ambrosius and Zacher aside to discuss the situation together. Father Pasini revealed his plan, which was to take this opportunity to make him and Ambrosius the tutors of Princess Chinla. As the tutor of the princesses, Father Pasini naturally followed the upper class route of Catholic tradition and directly converted the king to Christianity. There is no more direct way of preaching than this for Ambrosius. Nothing could make it easier to get close to the princesses than being their tutor. As for this covenant, let the ministers in the Imperial Council worry about it. After all, Ferdinand I was not Franz II and would not personally inquire into the details of these transactions. Ferdinand I also did not have this ability. As for the 20,000 pieces of silver, you still have to collect it, but you must report it and apply for use as startup funds for the supply. The 3 of them all agreed with this plan, but they were just afraid of what might happen at this time. Father Pasini said that the Austrian church was willing to take all risks for this. At this time, the Austrian church was very wealthy. It not only had donations and private property from all walks of life, but also had the power to collect tithes from the congregation. It's just that the Austrian church is now under state control, and these incomes must be taxed by the state, and the specific amount must be reported to the state. After everyone made up their mind, they explained everything to Guan Jinpan. Guan Jinpan was hesitant at first. After all, letting 2ZIE become teachers of the princesses would attract attention too easily. But when I thought that, if this matter was exposed, not only would the restoration of the country be hopeless, but also my reputation would be ruined, I gritted my teeth and became determined. Isn't it just to place two people next to the princess? He still has a waypoint. Moreover, this member of the Austrian royal family has become the teacher of the princesses. If he enters the palace, isn't that equivalent to being a hostage in his own hands? Yes, as long as you say this, everything will be solved. Austria Vienna. Count Tyrrell, the Minister of War, opened Ambrosius's report in his office and was immediately ecstatic after reading it. Because this order is so wonderful for the Austrian military. The Austrian army could just gather these obsolete rifles and send them to Chandler to make a lot of money. As for whether it was 180,000 taels or 300,000 taels, Count Tyrrell didn't care. He just hoped to get rid of these guns as soon as possible, and the money in exchange could be used to continue to update equipment. In order to complete the deal as quickly as possible and support the pioneers of the Austrian Empire's first overseas supply. Count Tyrrell decided to skip the cabinet and let the military take over the business directly. Because at this time, Francis II died, and Ferdinand I ascended the throne, causing the entire country to fall into chaos. The conflict between Metternich and Count Korolov intensified, and bureaucrats from both factions attacked each other and competed for power. The newly appointed chief royal advisor, Karl von Sloot, relied on his status as Queen Anne's lover and wanted to be a regent. As a result, he was directly excluded from the core of power by Count Korolov and Prince Metternich. As for who should control the future and power of the Austrian Empire, the two sides refused to give in to each other. In the end, only the will of Francis II could be made public. Francis II requested the formation of a Regency Council to replace the Royal Council. The Regency Council was composed of 4 special members: Count Korolov, Prince Metternich, Archduke Louis, and Archduke Franz Karol. The original intention of making this will public was to stabilize the court situation, but it aroused Count Korolov's greater dissatisfaction with Prince Metternich. Because when this will was made, Count Korolov was not present, but Metternich was present. This made Count Korolov suspect that Metternich was using false edicts. In fact, this was done deliberately by the old emperor. He did not want the two powerful factions in Austria to be close. At the same time, he also added 2 royal members to the Regency Council as a double insurance. The biggest purpose of this is to balance, not to let any party's power grow bigger, and not to allow them to endanger the royal family. Even if the 2 regents agree, there are 2 members of the royal family who can act as a check and balance. As a result, the most ridiculous government in history was born. This government can be said to have achieved nothing because they are endlessly wrangling every day. Whatever opinion Prince Metternich raised, Count Korolov objected to. Vice versa. As for Archduke Louis, he didn't understand national politics at all, so he only looked at whether it was beneficial to the family. Of course, he would remain silent most of the time. Archduke Franz Karol, on the other hand, was more interested in wine than politics. As a result, the Regency Council became ineffective and the entire country was unable to issue any decrees. The country is at a standstill, something that is keenly captured by Madame Sophie, who seeks to control her husband in order to further her own political ambitions. But Franz Karol always remembered the advice his father gave him: don't take a stand, don't speak, don't agree, don't oppose. Chapter 38 Armed Preaching. Schönbrunn Palace. Children's room. Mother, I'm already 5 years old and can sleep alone. Franz looked at Mrs. Sophie helplessly. No, I think you need me. And you can't deny mother her duty, Madame Sophie insisted. It was snowing heavily that day. Captain Lin walked less than half a mile when he saw a dilapidated church. Franz sighed a little, lamenting that women in all eras like to follow TV dramas. Phnom Penh, Chenla Palace. At this time, King Anzan was no longer in the palace, but his 4 daughters were still in the palace. They are the princesses of Zenla, and the palace is their home, but now they can only live in the cold palace. Because the other palaces have been occupied by Vietnamese General Giang Minggio. He has absolute power as the Vietnamese military governor in Chinla. Giang Ming said that the first thing he did when he entered the Phnom Penh palace was to occupy King Anzan's concubines, then increase taxes in the name of King Anzan, and recruit young and beautiful women into the palace. The Guanjin family was not spared either. More than a dozen of their daughters were summoned to the palace, and many of them were forced to commit suicide because of their humiliation. Guanjin Pan hated Zhang Mingdao to the core. Zhang Mingdao did not dare to mess around with the 4 princesses of Zenla, but he was not afraid of the Zenla people. But he was afraid of the supervisory army sent by Emperor Mingming, a eunuch named Li. The eunuch surnamed Li was nominally here to supervise military affairs. In fact, on the one hand, he came to limit Zhang Mingjiao's power. On the other hand, he was afraid that Zhang Mingjiao would come into contact with Anzan's descendants, and that he would also want to imitate Kao Mengde and threaten the emperor. To order the prince's Sinology and Confucianism have an unshakable status in Southeast Asian countries. It is not surprising that Emperor Mingming knew this illusion. It's just that Emperor Mingming's approach gave Guanjinpan room to operate. As a group that has lost the right to be normal people, eunuchs are either greedy, bad, or have some special hobbies. This eunuch surnamed Li liked to compose poems, and official Jinpan naturally liked him. He often brought famous figures from the Zenla literary world into the palace to recite poems to compete with the eunuch surnamed Li. How could one recite poems without wine? Official Jinpan sent people to collect fine wines and presented them to the eunuch surnamed Li. Over time, Guanjinpan became a confidant in the eyes of the eunuch surnamed Li. On this day, Guanjinpan approached the eunuch surnamed Li with a set of Tang Dynasty's original manuscripts and an exquisite jade dew. The eunuch surnamed Li was happy, but said calmly, "Brother Guanjin, you gave such a heavy gift to our family. If you have any questions, just tell me, brother Li. The princesses have reached the age of enlightenment, and I would like to hire a husband for them." The eunuch surnamed Li breathed a sigh of relief. He thought it would be something important, but it turned out that he was just asking for a master. The eunuch surnamed Li replied, "Of course it's possible, but I wonder if anyone can be the master of the princesses, and if we can meet him." Jinpan naturally understood that it was impossible not to let the eunuch surnamed Li see him, not to mention that sooner or later the eunuch surnamed Li would know about this matter, and he couldn't hide it. "Master and Master Pa, come and let brother Li meet you." And Pa are both common surnames in Zenla, so the eunuch named Li didn't pay much attention to them. But when I saw Ambrosius and Passini, I was really shocked. Yellow-haired ghost official Jinpan said, "It's the IE. Oh, yes, they are Yui people. But do they have real talents and knowledge?" Eunuch surnamed Li boasted that he was rich in knowledge and planned to meet 2 Western Yui people. Of course, Guanjinpan would not let Eunuch Li and Ambrosius express themselves freely, so he simply said directly, "It is virtue for a woman to have no talent. These 2 Westerners teach mainly dance and music." These words instantly made the eunuch surnamed Li lose interest. "I'm just telling you, the Yui people don't know much about writing, they only know how to sing and dance." Then he said to the little eunuch next to him, "Give them a badge and lead them there." The little eunuch bowed his head and said yes. Just as he turned to leave, he was stopped by the eunuch surnamed Li. "Wait." The eunuch surnamed Li's voice immediately made the atmosphere tense, and Ambrosius had already reached for the gun at his waist. "It stinks so bad. Let them bathe and change clothes. Don't bring the stench into the palace." Ambrosius and Guanjinpan both breathed a sigh of relief. Yes, Ambrosius finally met the Her Royal Highness he had longed for, but these princesses were completely different from what he imagined. The clothes are very rustic, and even the fabrics used are similar to those of palace maids, especially at this age. They look like they are in their teens, and the youngest is only 7 or 8 years old. Ambrosius complained endlessly in his heart, "You shouldn't listen to the little brat." While Ambrosius was looking at the princesses up and down, several Lalita were also looking at him curiously. After all, the princesses have lived in the palace since they were born and have never seen a man, let alone a Westerner. The 2 sides were just there, looking at each other awkwardly. In the end, Father Passini came to the rescue. After all, as a professional missionary trained by the church, his communication skills must be very excellent. The princesses had a very good first impression of Ambrosius. After all, Ambrosius was very different from the eunuchs they usually saw. In addition, the Grand Duke Ambrosius also looked good, so he was naturally easily attracted by him. People get close. Chenla, Kampong Sombe. The establishment of the port went very smoothly. The people here were surprisingly insensitive and had no intention of resisting these uninvited guests. The officials also became very cooperative after accepting bribes. The Catholic priests also started their strategy. These people first penetrated into the nearby villages, donated doctors and medicines, and distributed rice. This routine operation could only attract the attention of the local people. To preach in the colonies they required special methods. A village was often harassed by bandits. The combat priests were divided into two teams. One team ambushed the bandits with guns, while the other team went to the village to help the villagers defend the village and prevent the bandits from reporting inside. When the bandits were repelled by the combat priests guarding the village, another team of combat priests who had already been ambushing them rushed out and killed the bandits in one fell swoop. The priests tied the bandits to the village square and asked everyone to tell them about their crimes. At this time, the villagers naturally had complaints and revenge. When the bandits were beaten to death by the villagers, the priests stopped the villagers' atrocities. The priests asked the bandits to confess their sins, a scene all too familiar to Buddhists in Southeast Asia. It's almost certain that these foreign monks are going to let these damn bandits go. The villagers thought in their hearts the bandits also thought that they should be able to escape, and sooner or later they would kill all these damn unruly people. After all, these foreign monks could not guard these villagers every day. However, what the villagers and bandits did not expect was that after the bandits repented, the priests sent them to the cross and had them baptized in fire. May the Lord forgive your sins. Amen. After seeing the priests fighting power and methods, the villagers changed their beliefs one after another. The priests looked at the villagers who became more and more pious and praised in their hearts, Archbishop Rocha's method is so effective. What they didn't know was that these missionary strategies were all the work of a child. Chapter 39, 1835. The aftermath of the death of Francis II is still spreading, and the small states that had previously fought fiercely with Austria are like eggplants beaten by frost. Many state governments had lost confidence in Austria. After all, their ambassadors came to the same conclusion. After meeting the new emperor and his chief advisor Emperor Ferdinand, I was a good man, but he probably couldn't control this huge empire. And the chief advisor, Mr. Karl von Sloot, is a complete idiot. The new emperor and his empire will continue to face various challenges and pressures in the days to come. If we side with Austria, we will have to face challenges and pressure with them, which is not in the interests of our country. Austria has completed 20% of the 1,400 kilometer railway construction plan. The railway between Vienna and Moravia has been completed, and the construction of the Semmering Railway, a century project, has also begun. The cost of the Semmering Railway is expected to be more than 3 times that of ordinary railways, but it is also of great significance. It will not only strengthen the connection between the seaside area and Vienna, but also communicate with northern Italy, thus revitalizing the overall situation. The Prussians frantically built 200 kilometers of railways, but they were not on their soil. Prussia's new economic advisor proposed a new railway standard for the countries that joined the North German Customs Union. The gauge of this railway is different from that of the Austrian railway. Wider means it can carry more goods. Friedrich List's real purpose was to help Prussia control Austria's influence in southern Germany. To be honest, Franz admired this economist from the bottom of his heart for actually thinking of using this method to exclude Austria. In fact, Austria also had countermeasures at this time, which was to change the track gauge, or to force members of the German Customs Union to build railways in accordance with Austrian standards. But either choice will affect Austria's reputation in the German Saar's Union, and more importantly, it requires a stable and strong government. The Regency Council greatly reduced the efficiency of the Austrian government. Even Count Korolaf and Prince Metternich did not realize the sinister intentions of Friedrich List. But this is no wonder, because both Count Korolaf and Prince Metternich have very limited understanding of railways. When Franz saw this, the overall situation was basically decided, and there was little point in making amends now. Friedrich List's strategy allowed Franz to see a new possibility for Austria in the future. At this time, Britain had built more than 1,000 kilometers of railways, and France had nearly 300 kilometers of railways in Russia. Franz Joseph, an Austrian engineer obsessed with railways, wrote a letter to Nicholas I. The letter described an ambitious plan to build a railway connecting St. Petersburg and Kazan to strengthen the Tsar's control over West and Siberia. The total length of this railway was more than 1,000 kilometers. It was an incredible plan for people at the time. However, this aroused great interest in Tsar Nicholas I, who felt that the railway was a gift from God to Russia. Tsar Nicholas I had an even bolder idea. He wanted to connect the entire great Slavic Empire with railways. Constantinople, St. Petersburg, Kazan, Yakutsk, a city in the Russian Far East, Alaska. In order to realize his lofty ideals, Tsar Nicholas I established a road casting committee. The result was, of course, fierce opposition from the ministers. The dignitaries did not agree with the emperor's opinion and openly opposed the construction of any railway in the country. The most dissident among them was Count Conklin, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who stated in a report to the Tsar that not a penny of the treasury was reserved for the railways. Russian experts also jumped out to support Count Conklin. They argued that the freight capacity of the train was too small and not as large as that of 300 horses. The Russian Empire had 5 million mules and horses, which could cope with any situation. In addition, Russia lacked coal, and forests had to be cut down to power trains, leaving Russian civilians without wood for fires. Russia's pig iron production is seriously insufficient. If such a long railway is to be cast, a large amount of pig iron must be imported from abroad, which will bring Russia's metallurgical industry into a cold winter. Nicholas I's most trusted subordinate, Duke Liubey, even suggested that this was most likely an Austrian conspiracy to use the railway to weaken Russia's national power so as to gain an advantage in the carving up of the Ottoman Empire. In the end, Nicholas I had to give up his grand plan. But he was not discouraged. Russia still has no railways. The railways built by the Americans in 1 year were longer than the total length of French railways at this time. 400 kilometers. Cotton prices fell as US cotton production exceeded expectations. But at this time, wheat in the United Kingdom and the United States experienced a super bumper harvest. After wheat farmers experienced losses, they switched to cotton. Although cotton prices have dropped, they are still generally popular, and at least they will not lose money. The revenue from land sales by the US government this year can fully repay the debt owed by the US government, and it is expected that there will be a large fiscal surplus next year. Saxony purchased another 500 steam looms from Austria. Austria's entry in the establishment of the German customs union almost doubled Saxony's fiscal revenue. This is not only because Saxony is the textile center of Germany, but also because it is the largest second-tier dealer in the German customs union. There were constant frictions between Prussia and Austria, and Saxony, sandwiched between Prussia and Austria, became the biggest beneficiary. After all, businessmen will not struggle with money. Friction between the two countries cannot prevent businessmen from the two countries from doing business. Although Austria's machinery manufacturing industry has received many orders, it is still in a state of limbo. This is mainly due to competition from the British, because at this time the United Kingdom has allowed the export of machinery. British machinery manufacturing started much earlier than Austria, and the level of craftsmanship is naturally much higher. If it were not for the protection of the German customs union and Hanover's refusal to join the German customs union, Austria's machinery manufacturing industry would have gone further and further in the direction of agricultural technology as it did historically. Due to internal chaos, Austria increased military expenditures, but reduced the number of Austrian army troops, which are now 440,000. For its own security reasons, France added another 20,000 soldiers and gendarmes, as well as several indigenous troops, bringing the total strength to 530,000. Prussia still had 200,000 troops, and Russia launched a war against domestic nomads, with its troop strength remaining at 600,000. This year both France and Austria began to update their weapons and equipment with new, more stable front-loading percussion guns. France developed a new field gun, a lighter and more accurate 4-pounder. Austria has developed a famous suicide artifact in history, This artillery has a range and power that far exceeds the range and power of artillery of the same caliber at the same time point. However, due to the casting technology and the lack of better casting materials, the probability of the gun's chamber exploding is as high as 20%, which is more exciting than the later Russian turntables. The Austrian Navy has welcomed its 4th naval marshal in 10 years. This marshal is still not a professional soldier, but a businessman who operates inland shipping. Veristave. Austria's fiscal revenue was 158 million florins, which was higher than the 132 million florins in the same period in history. Chapter 40 Heavy. 1836, Vienna, Schönbrunn Palace. Franz celebrated his 6th birthday. According to royal practice, Franz had to leave the children's room. When Franz left the children's room, Maximilian stared at Franz, wishing that Franz would leave his kingdom immediately. As the second eldest child in the family, Maximilian was shorter than Franz in every aspect. Everyone who comes to the children's room will visit Franz first, whether it is a servant or a family member. It seems that everything is prepared for Franz, and he can only do second place. When Maximilian went to the Hall of Mirrors for the first time, he was attracted by the bright and spacious hall, and Francis II was sitting on the high throne, which made Maximilian feel turbulent. He unconsciously wanted to step onto the throne, but he was stopped by Francis II. Little Maximilian, don't go any further. You can't sit in this position. But Maximilian did not intend to listen to the old man's words, and then Francis II said in a more stern tone, "Louis, take him away, and let him play somewhere else." Archduke Louis stopped Maximilian and said, "Grandpa, Louis will take you to play. Do you want to watch the military parade, or ride a horse?" Maximilian did not answer, but looked back reluctantly at the throne. It was clear that Franz was sleeping on it. We were both born from the same mother's womb. Why is God so unfair? BGM. Snowflakes are falling, and the north wind is blowing. The world is vast. After Franz left the children's room, he had his own room. The advantage was that he had his own territory, but the disadvantage was that he could no longer sleep with Thalia's lap in his arms. Thalia was also forced to leave the small home where she had stayed for 5 years and move next door to Franz. After all, as a tutor, she had the obligation to take care of Franz. Franz felt that the biggest advantage of leaving the children's room was that he could stay away from Mrs. Sophie's harassment. However, it turned out that Franz was still too young, and he did not know how terrifying a woman would be if she rose up and spat. She has despaired of her husband's timidity and incompetence. Ever since, Mrs. Sophie focused all her energy on Franz. First thing Mrs. Sophie did was to move the big bed out of Franz's room and replace it with a cold camp bed. "Franz, you must not be weak from now on. You must fight like a man. This family needs you, and this country needs you too." Mrs. Sophie obviously wanted to infect Franz with her enthusiasm, but Franz was not happy to leave the soft bed. "But what does this have to do with the bed? A warm bed will kill your will and kill your soul. It's terrible, mother. But this cold iron bed will make me sick. A difficult environment can easily make people irritable. It's easier to be satisfied after success, and it's easier to be depressed after failure." Franz explained that, to be honest, he really doesn't think that the more miserable people are, the easier it is to succeed, and the easier it is to go to extremes. "You talk too much nonsense. As your mother, you must listen to me." Mrs. Sophie pinched Franz's face. Franz covered his face and thought to himself, "If I had said this earlier, I wouldn't have explained it. If it was just a bed, that would be looking down on Mrs. Sophie." Franz's food has also deteriorated a lot. In the past, Franz's food was personally responsible for the royal chef. Now that Mrs. Sophie has taken over Franz's meal, she hopes that Franz can feel the suffering of the people. As a result, some inexplicable food appeared on Franz's dining table, including blood sausage and beef tripe. There was actually a kind of porridge-like food, which looked friendly to Franz, but the taste was really unpalatable. And it's not so much porridge as it is paste, a slimy semi-solid substance. This kind of food is a kind of food in rural areas of Austria. It is made by boiling things like wheat bran, cabbage and bracken with water. Wheat bran, a byproduct of wheat processing, is now often used as feed. It tastes bad and can scratch your throat. I have eaten it. After several days of torture, Franz thought it was over unexpectedly. Mrs. Sophie planned to let Franz know the customs of various countries around the world. First, Britain. Looking up at the stars, Franz had mixed feelings looking at the plate of small fish that were still clinging to death. Then came the canned herrings from Sweden. The cook in the kitchen heated them up for fear of spoiling Franz's stomach. Then a disaster of epic proportions struck. The stench spread everywhere, and the servants had to clean the kitchen thoroughly and replace all the kitchen utensils. Spanish cheese. Japanese bonito. But it wasn't Franz who couldn't bear it first, but Thalia. As Franz's tutor, she also has the responsibility of tasting food. Therefore, Thalia is the first victim of every dark dish cooked by Mrs. Sophie. In the past, she would naturally accept all the big meals, but now the dark cuisine is really too much for her. Finally one day, Thalia was poisoned by Mrs. Sophie's dark cuisine. She first suffered from diarrhea, and then a high fever. If Franz hadn't prepared Alison long ago, I'm afraid Thalia would have met God. However, after Thalia woke up, the first thing she did was to ask Franz what he had given her. Just when Franz was about to introduce his new product Alison to her, Thalia stopped Franz. Don't say it out loud. Let me vomit for a while. I'm not pure anymore. Franz was confused. In fact, he had prepared penicillin, but the output was too small, and Franz did not have injection tools. Thalia couldn't stand the horrible food, and told Madame Sophie that she wanted to resign. I would rather spend the rest of my life in jail than never eat these horrible foods again. At this time, Mrs. Sophie finally realized that she might not be a good cook and the food she chose might be a little too much. Instead of punishing Thalia or sending her to prison, Madame Sophie gave her 500 florins and a week's vacation to eat well and relax. 500 florins was not a lot at this time, equivalent to a worker's salary for 3 years. Madame Sophie gives Thalia a break, but Franz gives her a new assignment. After all, Franz now regarded himself as Thalia's savior, so Thalia had no choice but to do as he was told. Thalia, the tutor, was away, and Franz felt free that he no longer had to do homework. But Mrs. Sophie did not intend to let Franz go. She found a linguistics professor who was a real master and was proficient in more than a dozen foreign languages. Perhaps because the original owner's language talent was so exaggerated, Franz quickly mastered the 8 most important languages in the Austrian Empire. Chapter 41. 10,000 rubber tree seeds. Andrew Jackson listened to his subordinate's implementation of the Indian Removal Act, although in his eyes the Indians should not have legal status, and those weak, savage tribes should be crushed by the strong American army. But the blood of the Indians inspired him, but it was a pity that he could not scalp those Indians with his own hands, which made his skills rusty. Andrew Jackson thought of his ancestors, whether it was George Washington or Thomas Jefferson. These great presidents were free to massacre Indians. How could it be that in his time, Andrew Jackson still had to find excuses to kill Indians? It's really damn it. But Andrew Jackson is the president after all. Using the Removal Act to reduce the number of Indians must be a mission given to him by God. But when he mentioned the Indians, Andrew Jackson thought of the hypocritical and conceited banker. Damn it, Biddle idiot. If it weren't for the damn Relocation Act, the government wouldn't have so much debt. Damn it, Biddle bastard. He just paid off the debt he owed, and he wants me to apologize to him. The costs of the Removal Act were huge, and many people within the US government were dissatisfied with it, including Andrew Jackson and his kitchen cabinet. But now Biddle's reputation has reached its peak, and everyone calls him the god of wealth. Based on current income, the US government's income will hit a record high this year, and Mr. Biddle is indispensable, replied Martin Van Buren. Even Andrew Jackson's most trusted kitchen cabinet members acquiesced to this fact, because the benefits from the land were too exaggerated. Fuck the god of wealth. That fool actually built a temple for himself. Biddle and the Indians should disappear from this world. Martin, believe me, he will definitely destroy this country. Andrew Jackson roared hysterically. Martin Van Buren did not answer, for even he now believed Biddle's theory. As long as housing prices are high enough, if you sell New York, you can buy the whole of Europe. Even if I want to achieve Napoleon, I can't do anything. However, the Removal Act was a complete disaster for the Indians west of the Mississippi River. The Indians called their migration path the Trail of Tears. Thousands of people from the Cherokee clan alone died on the Trail of Tears of the 45,000 Indians who were forced to migrate. Less than 20,000 successfully completed the migration point. However, what Andrew Jackson did not expect was that it was his forced eviction policy that allowed the land trade in the United States to continue to heat up. At the same time, economic experts and speculators, including Friedrich List, also joined this massive army of real estate speculators. The land in Chicago has increased 45 times, which means that the land Franz purchased for $200,000 is now worth $9 million. Although the land prices in other parts of the United States are not as exaggerated as those in Chicago, the entire United States is in a state of extreme optimism. They believe that land prices across the country will be like Chicago's in the future. The most important reason why Friedrich List joined the real estate speculators was that when he was working in the Austrian cabinet, he got the news that Baron Bruck had received funds, possibly from the royal family, to buy land in the United States. Moreover, as the US Consul General to the German Confederation, Friedrich List also knew the situation in the United States. That is, the land craze had spread throughout the United States, and Friedrich List had no reason to let go of this opportunity. He spent all his savings and industries in the United States, and even took out a loan in Prussia. Within Prussia, this consultant was highly regarded. In particular, his method of preventing Austria's power from extending further into North Germany was simply an art. However, some officials were very dissatisfied with Friedrich List's greed, because such a person had impure motives. He might help Prussia for money today, but he might betray him for money tomorrow. But William III was unmoved. He felt that, although this kind of person was only interested in profit, from another perspective, as long as there were enough benefits, this kind of person was the most loyal minister. Vienna, Schönbrunn Palace. Franz is writing a letter in front of the desk. This letter is addressed to Archbishop Rorschach. Although Rorschach believed that Franz was a born saint, he still only regarded Franz as a child. So Franz could only play the trick of divine revelation. Franz said that he saw angels in his dream, and the angels led Franz to a stone tablet, but Franz just faithfully recorded what was written on the stone tablet. Text. Franz had already completed 3 letters before, one to Brazil, one to Mexico, and one to India. Of course, Franz didn't need to be pretentious when writing the previous 3 letters. The missionary efficiency of the church in this era was too low, so Franz had no choice but to transform it and keep pace with the times. Although he still couldn't deceive himself by doing so, it was a dimensionality reducing blow to ordinary people in this era. Adventurer Costa finally met the mysterious sponsor, but what he didn't expect was that this generous sponsor turned out to be a woman. And you can tell from her clothes and temperament that this lady must be very rich. If you can get close to such a rich woman, you won't have to go to that damn tropical rainforest to look for that damn treasure for the rest of your life. So he was very courteous to Thalia along the way, but Thalia, as an old girl of this era, was completely unmoved. First of all, Thalia herself has no interest in getting married. Secondly, she has been kicked out of the family and there is no problem of continuing the family line. In addition, she also owes an outrageous debt to the royal family. Although Franz and Mrs. Sophie may not let her repay, the most important thing is that the vulgar man in front of her is not to her liking at all. Thalia was born in a noble family and later entered the palace. Her vision was terrifying. What she likes is a refined man, not a greasy uncle. And how could Costa, an adventurer who has lived in the open air all year round, be associated with the word exquisite? Costa found that he could not attract the other party's attention, so he had to get the topic back on track. Madam, I got the treasure of the Golden City. Before Costa could finish his words, Thalia stared back. He immediately understood that he was wrong. The lady in front of him was actually not married yet, so he immediately smiled awkwardly and said, "Miss, I have obtained the treasure map of the Golden City. In the Golden City, there is a city made of gold by Inca. As long as we can bring back a few gold bricks, you can recover your investment. But we will definitely do it 100 times. No, I will reward you 1,000 times and make you the richest person in the world." The Legend about the Amazon Golden City has been passed down for hundreds of years, and as many as 8,000 people died because of it. But legends are just legends, and Thalia has no interest in them. She interrupts Costa's boasting. I want 10,000 rubber tree seeds, for which I will sponsor 100,000 florins 4-year expedition. Costa was a little surprised. Miss, why do you want the seeds of the rubber tree? Enrich my garden. Costa was speechless. You are really a person with elegant taste. Please vote and support. How old is the protagonist before he can go out and beat people up? If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 42 Letters from Afar. No matter how Americans glorified the Battle of Texas, it could not change its aggressive nature, so Franz planned to help. The Americans' method of subverting Texas was not clever, which was to use large-scale immigration to dilute the local Mexican population, just like boiling frogs in warm water. When the Mexican government discovered that the number of American immigrants had exceeded the Mexican population due to constant friction between the newly arrived American immigrants and the local indigenous Indians and Mexicans over water sources and land, the Mexican government had to take action and issued a new law prohibiting the entry of American immigrants. However, due to the vast area of Texas and the sparse population of Texas at the time, and the fact that Americans did not intend to comply, Mexico's prohibition of immigration decree was useless. In 1824, at the strong request of domestic Catholic forces, Mexico announced the abolition of slavery. By 1830, there were no slaves in Mexico, except Texas. American immigrants did not intend to abide by Mexican laws, and they still established plantations everywhere. To buy black slaves. Demanding the freeing of slaves was unacceptable to American immigrants at the time. You must know that before the end of the Civil War, black slaves were an important economic pillar in the American South. Cutting off people's wealth is like killing their parents, which destined a war between the Mexicans and these American slave owners. By 1835, seeing that the time was ripe, the United States simply instigated Texas to become independent directly. Afterwards, the president of Mexico went on a personal expedition, but lost his troops at the Alamo. He was even captured at the Battle of San Jacinto, and was forced to sign the Treaty of Velasco to recognize Texas independence. The Mexicans will be defeated so miserably, because the United States is far stronger than Mexico in terms of military power and social organization capabilities, but the Mexicans are not without a chance. They should at least be able to scrape off a piece of the United States. On January 1, 1836, Mexican President Tazanana decided to personally conquer Texas. Mr. President, I have your letter. Ruvel, the newly appointed vice president of Tazanana, shouted anxiously. Ruvel, you are the vice president now, not my messenger. As a senior national official, you must act like a senior official. Yes, sir. Ruvel has been following Tazanana since he became a messenger. He is Tazanana's most trusted subordinate. Tazanana is essentially a soldier. He is not interested in politics, but he is sensitive to power, which does not prevent him from leaving all political affairs to former Vice President Valius and hiding in the military camp as a general. After gaining presidential power, the latter wanted to do something. He first launched a series of government projects, then reduced the army, increased taxes, and restricted the power of the church, resulting in a deficit in the treasury and widespread complaints. Finally, under the joint pressure of the army, the church, and the people, Tazanana had to remove Valius and replace him with his adjutant, Lieutenant General Ruvel. However, Lieutenant General Ruvel was just a messenger. But Ruvel was rarely so excited. Tazanana was a little curious about the origin of the letter. Whose letter is it from? Let me guess. Is it Andrew Jackson? No, sir. It's a letter from the royal family. Royalty. This is a letter from the Imperial family of the Austrian Empire, sir. Tazanana received the letter with some excitement. The signature on the letter was Archduke Franz Karol. You can go, sir. Yes, Mr. President. After Ruvel left, Tazanana was very excited when he looked at the letter because it said, "My dear brother, Tazanana, Tazan." Anna joined the army at the age of 16 and joined the Mexican War of Independence. He first joined the Spanish army and later joined the rebel army. In 1829, he was known as national hero after Mexico's victory. Some people even called him the savior of Mexico. However, Tazanana modestly replied, "I'm Napoleon of North America." At this time, North America, both the United States and Mexico, was regarded as a barbarian land by Europe, and it was very difficult to gain recognition from Europeans, and now a member of the Austrian royal family actually calls Tazanana a brother. You must know that Napoleon III has been unable to be recognized by European countries since he came to power. The Tsar even used the title "my friend" to deliberately humiliate Napoleon. At this time, Tazanana's mood was as exciting as when the Japanese country was granted the title of Japan. After Tazanana opened the letter, she felt very happy after reading the 2 paragraphs. In her heart, she regarded Archduke Franz Karol as his half-brother. For such arrogant people, of course, we must first praise them. Franz highly praised Mexico's abolition of slavery, affirmed Tazanana's recent achievements, and strongly condemned the aggression of American immigrants. These are what Tazanana wants to see most, and he is already preparing to send envoys to Austria to establish diplomatic relations. Tazanana continued reading, and what he said next shocked him beyond measure. That is the current situation in Mexico. There are many factions in the country, and it is divided. The national treasury cannot make ends meet. There is a serious shortage of troops. The weapons are all antiques from the last century. The most important thing is that there is a traitor around him. It was Franz's own guess that there was an American traitor around Tazanana. After all, the Battle of San Jacinto was too strange, let alone how the Americans cut off the Mexicans' retreat and successfully attacked in broad daylight without the Mexicans noticing. Tazanana's course of action alone should not be so easily grasped by the Americans. There were no mobile phones at that time, so many messages had to be delivered by people. The news was spread to the military camp, the troops were assembled, and after the infantry arrived, they cut off the enemy's retreat, and finally launched a sneak attack. In the end, the Mexican army lost 700 people, and the Texan army lost 11 people, and wounded 28 people. If this is all a coincidence, then the chance is too low. Franz believed that there must be a spy around Tazanana, and regardless of whether there was a date or not, just shoot 2 shots, just in case he hit. However, the current situation in Mexico is that there are many factions in the country. It is divided, the national treasury cannot make ends meet, and there is a serious shortage of troops. Tazanana couldn't help but fell into deep thought. Although he trusted his subordinates, a Grand Duke far away in Europe knew the current situation of his country, so he had to doubt his subordinates' confidentiality. In the end, Franz came up with a solution to win over the Catholics and establish a good relationship with the media. At the same time, Austria planned to sell a batch of arms to Mexico, 20,000 rifles, and send 2 military observers and a professional tabloid editor. Thanks to Shinsao Buwushai for the reward and book friends. 2019020217000627. Bubu Buka, hahaha, Shenzhou Buwushai for their monthly passes, as well as the support of the vast number of book friends. I got home late today. I'm afraid it's only 2 chapters. Chapter 43. Too far from heaven, too close to America. Americans long for freedom, but they don't want to give freedom to black slaves. Mexico's largest newspaper, Noticias de Mexico, devoted an entire page to reporting on the atrocities committed by immigrants in the United States, and strongly condemned all the horrific atrocities committed against slaves, and called on all people with conscience and faith to unite to fight against the evil slaves host. They treat people as beasts, depriving human beings of their freedom, forcing those poor people to perform unpaid labor. Those poor people were beaten with sticks, whipped with whips, and had to wear handcuffs and shackles, living a life worse than pigs and dogs. Even though those poor people endured the pain and torture, the slave owners still refused to let them go. They separated their wives and children, knocked out their teeth, and marked their bodies with the symbol of humiliation and inhumanity of imprint. Use starvation and torture to make those poor people submit. This is wrong. This is sinful. This is shameless. Do you still need me to explain everything? No. Totally unnecessary. Our time and energy should be spent on more valuable things by now. Those slave owners have taken up arms and are ready to turn our free Mexico and the entire civilized world into their slave plantations, and we can no longer hope to move them with kindness, but pick up our swords to defend our homeland, cut off the chains of slaves, and throw all those chains into the furnace of the times, so that he can never come back to harm our descendants. God is with us. This newspaper aroused great repercussions in Mexico. Not only Mexico, but also newspapers in Europe and the United States reprinted the article due to deliberate dissemination. It was now known throughout the Western world that a group of Americans intended to re-establish slavery in a country that had signed the abolitionist proclamation. How shameless and barbaric this is. Even the United States is divided into two factions, but they all admit that in a country that has abolished slavery, those who re-establish slavery are evil. For a time, Mexico had the upper hand in public opinion, and domestic factions were unprecedentedly united. Catholicism served as the lubricant. Everyone planned to let these damn Protestants and slavery go back to their hometown. However, mere advantage in public opinion cannot bring real victory. On September 27, 1835, Gonzales fell without the Mexican army firing a single shot. On October 21, 1835, Goliad fell and all Mexican defenders were killed. On October 2, 1835, San Antonio was besieged. On December 9, 1835, San Antonio fell. On December 30, 1835, all of Texas fell. Goliad is the most important land and water transportation hub. Whoever takes it will control San Antonio. At this time, San Antonio was the capital of Texas and the most important food base and economic center. So Tazanana set the first battle in Goliad. On February 23, 1836, Tazanana led an army of 8,000 men, 20,000 rifles, and 30 artillery pieces, and pointed at Goliad. Tazanana liked the feeling of being regarded as a hero. In order to satisfy his vanity, Franz specially prepared a emancipation proclamation for him. Every time Tazanana conquered a place, he would gather the local black slaves and let them listen to his speech. So he stopped along the way. Black slaves kept asking to join Tazanana's army. Tazanana was worried about having nowhere to distribute his guns, so he quickly formed 3 black rifle companies at the same time. Tazanana united all the forces that could be united according to Franz's words. He sent people to contact the nearby Indian tribes. Tazanana said that as long as Indians help Mexico and abide by Mexican laws, they are Mexicans, and they will not be treated differently. In fact, the same words and similar promises were given to them by the American pioneers, but the Indians had been deceived too many times by the white people, and they asked to see Tazanana's sincerity. Tazanana directly ordered the soldiers to issue them rifles, but each rifle was only issued with 5 rounds of ammunition, and it was agreed that, as long as the Indians could abide by the covenant and help Mexico attack the Americans, they would receive it every week a batch of bullets. This made the Indian chiefs immediately fall in love with the Mexicans. Of course, they had no chance of fighting the Americans, but they could provide intelligence and harass the American supply lines. This is exactly the effect Franz wants. In fact, as long as the Indians can remain neutral, it will be a good thing for the Mexican Expeditionary Force. If the Indians could help collect intelligence, raid the supply lines of the American pioneers, and hunt down lone deserters, that would be perfect. 2 flowers bloom, one on each side. American settler Sam Houston, now the commander-in-chief of Texas and the future first president of the Lone Star Republic, had trouble because the pioneers were divided into several factions and his own troops were too far from San Antonio. Sam Houston did not want to make unnecessary sacrifices and decided to abandon San Antonio. He ordered the garrison in San Antonio to abandon Goliad and move into the countryside to wait for the arrival of the main Texas army. In fact, before Houston's order arrived, many militiamen and soldiers who temporarily joined the army fled from the fortress for various reasons. The most common reason is to go home and harvest wheat. It is normal for everyone to go home and harvest wheat. However, winter wheat is grown in Texas. It is usually sown from mid to late September to early October and matures from the end of May to mid to late June of the following year. Now it is February, and the local plantation economy is black. The slave is doing it. Only Colonel William Travis and his 150 men remained, but he still planned to refuse Houston's order. William Travis knew how important Goliad and San Antonio were to the entire emerging Texas, because once San Antonio is occupied by the Mexicans, it will be able to bring a steady stream of supplies to Tazanana and his Mexican Legion. In the eyes of William Travis, Texas military strength was seriously insufficient. There were less than 2,000 regular troops, and even if volunteers from the United States were included, the number would not exceed 3,500. Tazanana's expeditionary force has 8,000 people, and there is the cooperation of local Mexican armed forces. In addition, those damn black slaves, Indians, and betrayers are constantly joining Tazanana's team. William Travis placed his last hope on the United States. He hoped that the United States could directly participate in the war. For this reason, he must not lose San Antonio. In order to defend Goliad, William Travis began to write letters asking for help from everywhere. He needed more soldiers and more weapons. However, the Texans were also divided into several factions. Most of the leaders of these factions were the leaders of the colonization groups. These colonization groups had long been in a competitive relationship, so most people chose to turn a blind eye to William Travis's request for help. Chapter 44 The Alamo's All-Star Defenders. Goliad, Old John's Pub. William Travis pushed open the cypress leaf spring door of the bar, and he was greeted by the spicy smell of alcohol and the choking smell of cigarette smoke, mixed with the smell of foot odor and inferior perfume. The soldiers were having fun with the prostitutes, and the crowd acted wildly to the cheerful music. The soldiers carried the prostitutes on their shoulders. The bold prostitutes did not care at all about the sudden release of spring. Everyone was still immersed in the joy of victory. Now Goliad, San Antonio, and even Texas belonged to them. Just 3 months earlier, they had destroyed a 40-man Mexican garrison and successfully captured Goliad. But now Tazanana is about to arrive with a Mexican army of 8,000 people. If you include the remaining soldiers gathered along the way, the newly recruited black slaves, and the Indians, the total number may not be more than 10,000. Now William Travis was upset, and wanted to find the volunteer commander James Bowie immediately. As William Travis searched inside, he also had to avoid drunks and prostitutes who might bump into him at any time. The wet floor under his feet was stained with oil and rum, which made him almost slip. William Travis shouted, "Colonel James Bowie, are you here? I'm Colonel William Travis, and I need to talk to you." But no one answered. William Travis was so angry that he took out the pistol from his waist and fired 2 shots at the ceiling. Bang, bang. 2 gunshots stopped the noisy crowd, but the ring-shaped candlestick with candles hanging from the roof fell down, immediately knocking down a drunkard. "Carry him away." "Who is James Bowie?" A dwarf raised his hand, and William Travis asked with some confusion, "Ah, you James Bowie?" The dwarf answered with a quick shake of his head, "Colonel Bowie is upstairs, but I don't think he wants to be disturbed." William Travis was a little annoyed. "I'm Colonel William Travis, the top military commander here, and I'm going to see him now." The dwarf shrugged and pointed to the 2nd floor. William Travis angrily walked to the room on the 2nd floor, kicked open the door, and found Colonel Bowie doing something indescribable, so he had to close the door and wait outside. About 3 minutes later, Colonel Bowie opened the door. "Colonel William Travis, please wait." "Not long, just 3 minutes." The 2 sides smiled awkwardly, but the relationship unknowingly got closer. "Let's go to other rooms to talk and let her rest for a while," Colonel Bowie suggested. James Bowie is more famous for the knives he invented than for him personally. The Bowie knife with an upturned tip and a guard was later called the Bowie knife, which is the American military knife we most often see. James Bowie and William Travis came to the kitchen. Bowie picked up 2 glasses and handed one to Travis. "Have a drink first. You can't talk about it if you have a dry mouth." Then Bowie opened a bottle of rum and poured a glass for Travis and himself. Travis said as he pushed the glass away, "I don't drink. Those people outside can't fight at all, and I have bad news to tell you. No one will come to save us, and Tazanana brought 10,000 people, and we only have 2 colonel and 200 soldiers." "Oh, I heard it. So what if there are 10,000 people?" Bowie drank down the glass of wine nonchalantly. We lack enough soldiers and weapons. We only have 3 old antique cannons left by the Mexicans. Believe me, Travis, the Mexican cannons are no better than ours. Bowie said with a smile, because he knew that the Mexicans were still using Spanish antiques. But, my people, plus your volunteers, are only 200 people. How can we fight against Tassanana's army? I'm not afraid of death, but if I die I will let the Mexicans know that I'm not to be trifled with. I will tear off a piece of meat from their body and eat it in one bite with butter on it. James. Bowie did not lie. He was indeed not afraid of death. Everyone who met him praised him as a true Western cowboy and an outlaw. But, I don't want to die pointlessly. Then, give me your command, sir. Now the big guys are studying the founding of the country, and we want to stop Tassanana. It's that simple. Bowie went to get Travis' wine glass again, but Travis snatched it away. I'm not afraid of death, but I want to say Texas can't live without San Antonio, and history will prove me right. Travis drank the wine in one gulp, and then coughed it out. Yes, he is a tough guy. Haha. Bowie, I have a request. Travis hesitated. Say it like a man. I hope you will remain silent. I want to tell the soldiers that General Houston is on the way with 2,000 reinforcement. I'm afraid those cowards will escape. Our mission is to buy the big shots enough time. Bowie hesitated and nodded. Well, I'm not going to expose you. But if someone wants to leave, that's their freedom and you can't stop it. Whatever you want. I don't think Houston would be that stupid to give up on San Antonio. You and I both know how important San Antonio is to Texas. As long as San Antonio takes San Antonio, it will be invincible. However, in history, Tassanana, underestimating the enemy and advancing rashly after the Alamo battle, was finally succeeded in a surprise attack by the militia, led by the settler businessman Houston. As a result, all efforts were in vain. In the end, Tassanana himself was forever nailed on the pillar of shame. One day later, American legend David Crockett arrived in Goliad with 20 Tennessee volunteers. According to legend, David Crockett could tear apart wolves, fight brown bears, repulse an attack by 300 Indian warriors, and single-handedly foiled a British plot to assassinate the President of the United States. Such a legendary figure and the only American officer to surrender to Tassanana at the Battle of the Alamo. Historically, 20 Tennessee volunteers led by David Crockett were the last reinforcement to reach the Alamo, but in fact, a 400-man troop was stationed just a dozen kilometers away from the Alamo, led by Colonel Manning. But this group neither raided Travis at the Alamo nor obeyed Houston's order to leave San Antonio and join Houston's main force. These men stood by and watched the Alamo garrison perish, then became Tassanana's punching bag. Their only role in history was to give Tassanana the reputation of killing prisoners. A force of 1,000 volunteers had just set out from Boston, but it would be 2 months before they arrived. Sorry, there was a problem with the system just now, so I sent the draft directly. Chapter 45, The Battle of the New Alamo. Due to Franz's head start, international public opinion is now overwhelmingly in favor of Mexico. At the same time, Britain and France also decided to support Mexico out of their own interests and characterize the Texas uprising as a rebellion that undermined national order. President Andrew Jackson of the United States really wanted to go to Texas. After all, fighting was his specialty. He was too tired of fighting with capitalists and politicians all day long. However, Congress objected. Firstly, there is too much pressure from international public opinion. Secondly, this war is a Mexican civil war and the United States has no right to intervene. Therefore, Andrew Jackson had to adopt a neutrality policy and announce that the United States would not send troops to aid Texas, but he allowed local officials to openly support Texas, and the checkpoints on the US-Mexico border were ineffective as volunteers from all over the United States swarmed in. It also allowed Texans to exchange cotton for necessities such as food, weapons, military uniforms, etc. At the same time, officers and soldiers could retire early and participate as individuals to assist the Texas Volunteer Army. The Second Bank of America secretly approved a $2 million loan. In contrast, Mexico's Vice President Ruvel is already struggling Although he has received a batch of weapons from Austria, Tazanana needs more soldiers and more supplies. This makes Mexico's finances, which are already unable to make ends meet, even worse. Although the bill to impose special taxes has been passed, Ruvel knew clearly that, if it were not for the full support of the church, Mexico would have fallen apart by now. After Mexico became independent, it took over the mess left by Spain. The Federalists severely weakened the rule of the Mexican government. Local governments were overpowered, making the central government very weak. Ruvel followed the instructions in that letter and borrowed money from European banks, and only the French responded to them. The French have deep pockets, but are demanding staggering returns. If Mexico cannot pay off its debt quickly, I'm afraid the country will face bankruptcy. Ruvel couldn't make up his mind, so he could only scrape together some money. This money could only last 3 months, even if he stopped recruiting new soldiers. Goliad, Old John's Tavern. David Crockett brought bad news. The Comanches had reached an agreement with Tazanana. The Comanches had received weapons and they would fight for Tazanana. In fact, the Comanche raided the caravans not for Tazanana, but just to retaliate against the American immigrants and to make their own lives better. However, after research, Travis and Bowie agreed that they did not have enough troops and should abandon Goliad and retreat to the Alamo. As a result, Alamo, a humble missionary station, became the center of the storm. While the Alamo defenders were urgently reinforcing their fortifications, Tazanana was still in his gentle hometown. Tazanana is a person who knows how to enjoy herself very much. Even when she is away on an expedition, she takes her mistress with her. His mistress Jenny is a native white man who is just 16 years old and possesses a natural wild beauty. The 2 military observers sent by the Austrian Empire this time were not public tour groups in the usual sense. Instead, they were 2 real generals carefully selected by Count Tyrrell. Of course, they were both young and looked like graduates of military schools. It's just that these 2 were quickly worshipped by the Mexican generals. In Mexico, a country with backward military science, these 2 military observers directly served as teachers to the Mexican generals. Every small battle is a military exercise. The Mexican generals now understand the Austrian army's tactics as artillery bombardment, 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 the enemy fleeing, and the cavalry charging, charging, charging. In a previous battle, dozens of American settlers hid in their houses and refused to surrender. Then the 2 military observers ordered artillery bombardment for half an hour. Finally, the settlers had to escape from the ruined house, and then they were beheaded by the cavalry who had been waiting for a long time. This method of fighting without spending a single soldier is still very much in favor of the Mexican generals. Desertion has always been a big problem because of the Mexican military. Nearly 30% of soldiers deserted every time they went on an expedition, especially after military pay was issued. Fortunately, Tazanana personally led the troops this time, and along the way he also plundered the properties of many American immigrants who refused to surrender to Mexico. Otherwise, there would be less than 6,000 people left from Mexico City. Historically, Tazanana left Mexico City with 8,000 people, and less than 6,000 people remained before arriving at the Alamo. Facts have proven that for an army without faith, the best way to improve cohesion is through material rewards. February 28, 1836. Tazanana's army had besieged the Alamo for 5 days, but Tazanana was in no hurry to attack. Because Tazanana did not expect the war to go so smoothly, and he fell in love with oratory, he gathered the citizens of San Antonio to continue his speech. Although Tazanana's men could hear grains of rice in their ears, the freed slaves and Indian laborers were still very excited and divided the American immigrant community. Next comes the main event. These American immigrants can consider joining Mexico or leaving Mexico with their property. To join Mexico, you have to pay arrears in taxes, free slaves, hire Mexicans, etc. However, those who choose to leave cannot take away weapons. They will be attacked by Indians or gangs along the way, and their property will eventually be lost into the hands of Tazanana. March 5, 1836. Tazanana finally remembered the 200 American immigrant soldiers in the Alamo, and he decided to show his commanding skills to the 2 Austrian military observers. Of course, Tazanana himself also agreed with artillery. tactics, so he found a hillside outside the artillery range of the Alamo garrison and invited two Austrian army observers to have afternoon tea. At that time, when the war was going on, the soldiers were fighting tooth and nail, and it was a routine practice for the commander to drink tea. Tazanana even introduced his mistress Jenny to two army observers. On one side is black tea and burritos, on the other side is gunfire. But after an afternoon of artillery battle, the result was extremely shocking. The Mexican army had more than 30 cannons, and the Alamo defenders had 3 artillery pieces. The two sides fired at each other all afternoon, firing hundreds of artillery shells. As a result, 25 Mexicans were killed, and the Alamo defenders suffered only a dozen minor injuries. No one was killed. Tazanana was extremely angry when she got the news. Your cannonballs made of mud. Why didn't even the city wall collapse? That's why. In fact, the defenders of the Alamo had already strengthened the city walls and hung wooden signs on the walls to reduce the impact of cannonballs. But the main problem is that the Mexican artillery is too weak and the shooting accuracy is too poor. Most of Mexico's artillery has not received professional training and uses old antiques from the Spanish colonial period. This resulted in a serious lack of artillery range. And these people did not dare to shoot at close range when bombarding residential buildings. As a result, these hundreds of rounds actually hit less than a third of the city wall, and the power of the 3-pounder was severely insufficient, so the Alamo wall could stand. The Tazanana had a 16-pound siege gun, but its weight meant it couldn't keep up with large forces in a short period of time. Thank you to book friend 201903091120072229 for your monthly ticket and all readers for your support. I'm sorry for sending out the draft just now. There is something wrong with the version saved by the system. I'm sorry. Chapter 46 Battle of the Alamo, Vienna, Schönbrunn Palace, Archduke Franz. Believe me, I also sympathize with the poor enslaved people. But we are Austrians, and those people are Mexicans, or Americans. In short, whoever they are not in the Austrian Empire. Within control, Rorschach explained. Then, can we just ignore it? Franz asked. But we are beyond our reach. If I look on coldly today, and disaster will happen to me tomorrow, no one will cheer for me. Franz casually said. A famous saying of a certain master Archbishop Rorschach was a little helpless. He knew that he could not stop the Archduke, so he chose to believe in this born saint. The power of the church is limited, but I will find a way to help those poor people. I think my old friend Pope Gregory XVI may have a way. Pope Rorschach reminded Franz, since the Catholic power in Austria and Mexico was very strong, Franz forgot who should speak most at this time. His Majesty the Pope only needs to issue a bull condemning the slave traders in Mexico. Rorschach is not a fool. He understands that this matter will be of great benefit to the church and will not harm the church at all. He can also take the opportunity to improve relations with the Mexican Catholic Church. As for Pope Gregory XVI, that hypocritical and greedy guy, as long as he makes the stakes clear and gives him a sum of money, it won't be a problem for him to excommunicate those people in Texas. Although those Zinchen believers may not recognize Pope Gregory XVI at all, it doesn't matter, as long as Mexicans feel that they are righteous. Franz is not that superficial. What he wants is to get the Texas war out of the loop completely, and to completely shift public opinion to the side of Mexico to prevent unexpected situations from happening. After all, historically, Tazanana's main force was defeated by the militia led by Houston in 18 minutes. Although Franz had put pressure on Count Tilla through Rorschach, sent two experienced generals to Mexico, sold a batch of weapons at low prices, and even drafted a battle plan for him, it is guaranteed that Tazanana will carry out the plan. After all, as long as Tazanana is willing, he can easily find out that Archduke Franz Karol is actually not very smart. Rome, Holy See. Pope Gregory XVI issued a bull condemning slave traders for treating slaves like unclean animals and forbidding Catholics from participating in the trade. Those who engaged in this trade were subject to excommunication. This pardon immediately caused an uproar. A sensitive word, because at this time most European and American countries had announced a ban on the slave trade. Britain in 1806, the United States in 1807, France in 1794, Sweden in 1813, the Netherlands in 1814, Portugal in 1815, Austria in 1820, and Mexico in 1824. US immigrants purchased large numbers of black slaves on Mexican land to establish plantations, which violated both Mexican and US laws. You must know that in 1807, the United States promulgated a law prohibiting the slave trade, prohibiting any form of slave trade. However, due to huge commercial interests, it was difficult to implement the law, and the slave trade was still very rampant. The Battle of Texas has once again pushed the United States to the forefront, making the entire Europe question whether the United States is a civilized country. Chapter 47 Battle of the Alamo 2. Washington, White House. Martin Van Buren held a thick stack of letters and proposals, and then threw them heavily on his desk. Your Excellency, this is for today. Do you want me to open it for you one by one? Andrew Jackson put down the half bottle of gin in his hand, picked up a letter in one hand, clamped the cigar in his other hand, and took a long puff, blowing out a long smoke ring. Damn it. Can these people survive with enough food? The slave trade in the South is not going away for a day or two. They actually said that we should strictly implement the law prohibiting the slave trade. Are they going to pick the cotton fields in the South? But, Your Excellency, the British are now ready to expel us from the civilized world. They say that we are white-skinned and black-hearted barbarians who are not worthy of occupying the territory of the British Empire. Before 1815, 2 wars broke out between Britain and the United States. After that, there was a stalemate over tariffs and raw material issues. The Monroe Doctrine made the British resentful. Therefore, the vanguard of anti-Americanism at this time was the United Kingdom, even more anxious than France and the Mexicans. Viscount Palmerston even claimed that troops should be sent to Texas immediately to drive those American scum out of the civilized world. The land of the United States belongs to the British Empire, and the Americans are a group of thieves who have stolen the property of the British Empire. Viscount Palmerston's remarks received widespread support in Britain because the continued expansion of the United States will definitely affect British interests, and Britain, as a world hegemon, will not allow a challenger to emerge. Damn the British, we have declared neutrality. What else do they want? Andrew Jackson was in a bad mood. The price of American land had risen again. He dared to say that now all the metal currencies in the United States could not buy half of it. New York City. The Indians had just moved west of the Mississippi River, and the politicians were already studying how to keep the Indians moving westward. Maybe we should put a moratorium on the slave trade, one cabinet member suggested. That's impossible. Today we declare a ban on the slave trade, and tomorrow those politicians in the South will drive us out of office. Andrew Jackson shouted, Mr. President, I'm saying, let's make a statement and we don't have to do anything other than maintain the status quo. Andrew Jackson thinks it makes sense, and it's not the first time he has spoken out. Okay, you draft a statement declaring that our country prohibits the slave trade and will continue to maintain a neutral attitude in the Mexican Civil War. March 6, 1836, Alamo Fort. At the suggestion of 2 military observers, Tazanana sent an officer with his letter to the city walls to persuade the Alamo defenders to surrender. General Tazanana, liberator of San Antonio, president of Mexico, hero against Spain, protector of Indians, Napoleon of North America. It is hereby declared that Texas is the Texas of the Mexicans and is a province of Mexico. Your actions are an act of betrayal, but I, Tazanana, am a kind person. As long as you agree to surrender immediately, then I can ensure that you leave here safely. I promise to God otherwise, you will be left waiting for blood to be splattered on the spot. Bowie upstairs smoked out his cigar and shouted, are you done? The officer didn't know what it meant and replied, that's it. This is General Tazanana's order. Then you can die. Bowie put his cigar on the fuse of the cannon and boom, a cannonball hit the officer squarely, cutting the officer into 2 pieces on the spot, with red and white pieces scattered all over the ground. Before the surrounding cavalry could recover from the shock, artillery and gunshots rang out from the city wall, and the Alamo defenders had already targeted the Mexicans in front of them. A small group of cavalry, including officers, totaling 11 people, none of them survived. The furious Tazanana directly ordered hussars, charge. Only Stadion and Gabrens were left messy in the wind, and the cavalry charged the city. Chapter 48 The Battle of the New Alamo. The result of the cavalry's charge into the city was, of course, similar to that of the King Army's Battle of Bali River. The Mexican cavalry bravely rushed to the wall of the Alamo, and then had to dismount and shoot at the defenders on the city. After 20 minutes of fighting, 114 Mexicans were killed and had to flee in panic. Counting the previous 11 couriers and the 25 soldiers killed yesterday, the Mexican army's casualties are as high as 150. The casualties of the Alamo garrison were almost negligible. There are many folklores about the casualties in this battle in history, including such fantastic exchange ratios as 130 and 140. Even the history written by Americans, the book, also says that each Alamo man killed at least 10 Mexicans before the battle was over. Although Franz felt that the Mexican army was unlikely to pay such a heavy price, he still made two preparations: experienced military observers, military advisors, and a heavy siege at gunpoint. But Tazanana's operation exceeded Franz's imagination, and the two Austrian army observers were also stunned. General Tazanana, cavalry is not suitable for siege warfare. Stadion reminded. Tazanana also realized that he was wrong, but for the sake of his own face, he chose to ignore Stadion's words. Mr. Stadion, look at the courage of our Mexican army. The infantry advances. Then another tragedy happened. With the rhythmic beating of drums, Mexican soldiers wearing green shirts and white breeches were walking towards the Alamo in neat formation. A cannonball flew into the queue, first blowing off the head of the first person, and then bringing out a bunch of blood flowers in the queue. The second shell hit the ground and bounced up. The soldier tried to resist with his arms, but then both arms broke off and flew high into the sky. Although the Alamo defenders only had 3 artillery pieces, this was not enough to offset the Mexican army's disadvantage. When the Mexican soldiers came within 300 yards, the defenders began shooting, and people continued to fall. Although the Kentucky rifle used by the Texans was also designed in the last century, it was a rifle, that is, a rifled gun. The range of the Kentucky rifle was far greater than that of the muskets of the same era, and its accuracy was so high that I don't know where it is just when Stadion and Gabrens were about to dissuade Tazanana, the Mexican queue collapsed. After all, no one wants to die, and there are a large number of Indians and native whites in the Mexican army. Their treatment is not good. If the war goes well, they can still fight in the autumn wind. If the war goes wrong, these people will want to run away. Once the first deserter appears, the number of deserters will increase exponentially. In the end, Tazanana had to use the cavalry to stop the fleeing infantry regiment. After a brief chaos, after counting, the Mexican army lost more than 200 soldiers. This made Tazanana feel a little embarrassed. He ordered the commander of the 1st Infantry Regiment to be executed, so the unlucky commander went to see God. On the other hand, the Alamo defenders, Bowie and David Crockett, were already preparing to throw away Tazanana's celebration party. Many people felt that these Mexicans were not as difficult to deal with as the Indians, and the entire fortress was filled with a joyful atmosphere. But Travis was not happy anyway. Because before the siege began, a team of sentries reported the discovery of a giant artillery that was 4 to 5 meters long and required 10 horses to pull. If what the sentries said is true, it is most likely a 16-pounder heavy artillery or a 24-pounder gun. This kind of artillery is not even in the arsenal of the US Continental Army. It is only available in Europe. In fact, the US Navy also has this kind of artillery, but they are all installed on gunboats. Although Tazanana is very proud, he does not want to continue to let his men sacrifice in vain. After all, these people are the basis of his rule, and this is only the first battle. Mr. Gabrens, Mr. Stadion, do you have any good suggestions? You know, we Mexicans are all warriors, and we rarely encounter such opponents hiding in turtle shells. Through the battle just now, the two have analyzed the combat power of both sides. The Alamo defenders had better weapons. Even if the Mexican army was equipped with flintlock muskets shipped from Austria, the shooting accuracy of the two sides could not be compared. Although the Mexican army was numerically superior, it lacked both training and courage. In the battle just now, if the European army had been approaching the city wall, the Alamo could be captured with the loss of a few hundred more people. However, the Mexican army collapsed when it approached the city wall. You must know that after 100.5 miles, the attack just now not only failed to achieve any effect, but actually boosted the opponent's morale. I propose that the siege force be divided into two parts, to continue harassing the enemy, wait for the arrival of the siege guns, and then attack. Gablin said, yes, the enemy's morale is at a high level. Attacking now will definitely cause huge casualties to our army. But our army must win a battle to boost our army's morale. Stadion said. Tassingana felt that it made sense, and at the same time he was also very curious. Where did this victory come from? Even though he was obviously waiting for the artillery, how can our army fight a victorious battle? General, there is still a rebel team here, Stadion said, pointing to a small town more than 10 kilometers away from the Alamo on the map. But, Mr. Stadion, there are 600 people here. Tassingana found it incredible. Now he can't even eat 200 people. Wouldn't 600 people be enough to kill him? But they have no walls, General, Stadion replied. Tassingana was a little hesitant as to whether to follow this suggestion. Although there were no city walls in that town, there were houses. If street fighting broke out, the losses of his troops would not be small. Garblenz recognized Tassingana's concern. Your Excellency General, according to your sentry report, most of the residents in the town have fled, and the rest are a group of desperados. We can burn the town. Once these desperados escape into the plains, your cavalry you can crush them easily. Tassingana knew what Garblenz meant, and he admired the young man in front of him more and more. He was so ruthless. Garblenz was indeed a ruthless man. During the Italian War, his team was ambushed, and he himself lost an eye by the attackers. Garblenz killed the attacker on the spot, then led his troops to break through, and only fainted when they reached safety. So Tassingana left half of his troops, and continued to besiege the Alamo, while he took the main cavalry to cut the wheat. The Mexican military is very familiar with murder and arson, because they do it all the time on their own land. Ning, who was still sleeping, was woken up by his subordinates. He didn't even have time to put on his boots. The fire lit up the dark night, and there were chaotic crowds everywhere, with wailing and women's cries from time to time. How is this going? I don't know. Someone started a fire. The fire was too big and the well was blocked. We had to evacuate the town first. Firefighting measures in this era were very backward, and the Texas area was very dry, so large fires were common. Damn it, Ning led some of his men to escape from the town. As day broke, a large group of cavalry appeared on the horizon in the distance. Manning and his men thought that Houston's main force had arrived, and they all waved their arms excitedly until they saw the Mexican flag. A massacre begins. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 49, The French Ambition. The American immigrant separatist forces in Texas, referred to as the Secession Army, was a new definition given to the Texas Rebellion in newspapers, and it was quickly accepted by media around the world. Gizet and Thiers, two big figures in French politics, both believed that this was a good opportunity for France to return to North America. After all, the Mexicans are too poor. They should not be able to repay the interest, and then use the debt problem to take advantage of the opportunity to ask Mexico for Texas. Using the Gulf of Mexico as a base, it is not a dream to create a second France. They do not think this is wishful thinking, and they know that Mexico's national strength is simply not enough to support Tassingana's military operations. As a country as big as Mexico, its annual fiscal revenue is only 18 million pesos, less than 1/10 of France's fiscal revenue. According to French estimates, Mexico's funds will dry up in 3 months at most, and this is assuming that Mexico does not increase military spending. According to intelligence, the Texas Separatist Army has received support from the Americans. The training level and weapons and equipment of the Mexicans are very backward. As long as there is a small group of organized American troops, entering Texas can defeat the Mexicans regarding anti-Americanism. Although the British are the most noisy, it is impossible for them to send troops directly to Texas. So sooner or later the two sides in the war will become the United States and Mexico. The United States is much stronger than Mexico, and the failure of the Mexicans is a matter of time. If the Mexicans don't want to accept the fate of failure, they can only borrow money from France, and France is very willing to help these poor people. After all, we are all Catholic brothers. How can I be called the filial son of the French Catholic Church in vain? After the war, they used debt issues to claim Texas from Mexico. In this way, Mexico paid off its debts and received asylum from France. It can be said that it killed two birds with one stone. After all, as long as France is in Texas, the United States will not be able to continue its westward expansion, and the Mexicans will be able to sit back and relax. Thiers and Gizzard were still thinking about France's bright future in North America when a clerk on duty in the cabinet woke them up. Mr. Rothschild and the others are here to complete their good deeds. France needs the most professional bankers on a plain north of San Antonio. A massacre was taking place. The two sides fighting were Tazanana's 1,500 Mexican cavalry and the separatist Colonel Manin's 270 remnants. Both sides were doomed from the moment the battle began. Since Manin and his soldiers did not realize that the other party was Mexican at first, they thought they were reinforcement from Houston. The cavalry was allowed to advance to a distance of less than 100 meters. At this time, it was too late to organize the soldiers into a hollow square formation or to escape. At that moment, Manning gave up thinking and allowed the cavalry to crush his own team. The scattered deserters could not escape the pursuit of the cavalry, and the battle was over soon. Tassingana enjoyed the scene of the cavalry chasing down the defeated soldiers very much. He liked the feeling of blood splattering everywhere, and he shouted excitedly, "Kill them all. Good boy, God is with us." Gablands and Stadion had no interest in such a one-sided battle. Tazanana's adjutant reminded him, "The two military observers are still here, and we should observe gentlemanly etiquette." Only then did Tazanana realize that if he continued to kill indiscriminately, he would definitely be regarded as a barbarian, and he quickly gave the order, "Don't hurt those who surrender. Quickly stop them. No more killing." Several officers beat their horses and rushed out because the soldiers had already killed them. No matter who it was, they would be very excited when riding horses to chase rabbits. By the time the officers stopped the crazy cavalry, there were only a dozen people left in the separatist army, including Colonel Manning, who had given up thinking. Colonel Manning stood dumbly on the spot and was dressed in an officer's uniform. He was ignored by the cavalry. Instead, it was the fleeing soldiers and volunteers who inspired the cavalry's ferocity. A Mexican general quickly ran up to Tazanana, took off his hat and saluted. "General, it's your victory, a great victory. We captured 17 people, including a colonel, who was supposed to be their commander, and 300 guns." Colonel Manin was the highest ranking officer captured by the Mexican army since the war began. Tazanana was very proud. He wanted to humiliate this separatist officer, but he was disappointed. The man in front of him seemed stupid. The fighting in the direction of the town has also ended. Tazanana ordered his men to put out the fire, collect the affected refugees, and then threw all the blame for arson on the separatist army. Hundreds of residents of the town looked at their homes in ruins. Many people burst into tears. No one cared about Tazanana's pot-throwing speech. "General, you should show your mercy." In fact, Gablands already wanted to curse. How on earth did this man become the ruler of Mexico? Does he have no political talent at all? In fact, Tazanana was the first person in the Americas to bombard the presidential palace, and he also created a genre called house demolition style. As the name suggests, the presidential palace must be bombed every time there is a coup, causing the president to repeatedly build himself a new home. This genre it spreads widely, and all of Latin America is its fan. Such dictators who came to power through military coups often have very limited political means. However, since there were Austrian military observers nearby, he had to restrain himself. In order to maintain the image of the Mexican army, Tazanana ordered the soldiers to serve the residents of the town. He set up temporary tents and distributed part of the military rations he collected to the soldiers and civilians in the town. Tazanana's action gained a wave of support, but it made the military commander very angry because the military supplies from the rear had not arrived. The reason why the Mexican army is now popular is entirely because they robbed those rebels who betrayed Mexico. But now Tazanana refuses to plunder in order to maintain his image, and the Alamo has been unable to be captured for a long time. Goliad has food and supplies, but they have no money, which makes it difficult to deal with it. On March 9, 1836, the 16-pound heavy siege artillery that Tazanana had been waiting for finally arrived. Tazanana shouted with joy, "I'm going to kill all those Yankees." This made Gabilenz and Stadion feel that he was hopeless because there was no point in killing all those Yankees, but it would make those people heroes. Of course Franz knew this. He had already told Archbishop Prussia to do everything possible to get the Alamo defenders to surrender before Gabilenz and Stadion came to Mexico. They were told to surrender as many Texans as possible, especially the garrison of San Antonio. Now the Alamo garrison. Stadion was the first to speak. "Your Majesty General, you should first send those prisoners to persuade the Alamo defenders to surrender. If the other party surrenders, unnecessary bloodshed will be avoided, and your prestige will be enhanced." Tazanana immediately noticed that he had lost his temper. He was the Napoleon of North America. How could he not use both kindness and power? Tell the prisoners to tell the Alamo defenders to surrender. Chapter 50 The Battle of the New Alamo. Several Mexican soldiers drove the prisoners to the gates of the Alamo. These prisoners were very cooperative. After all, they had just experienced the hellish pursuit. They wanted to survive, so they shouted hard, "Colonel Travis and brothers from Alamo, we are Colonel Mannin's men. We were ambushed by the Mexican army. No one will come to your aid. Surrender quickly, Colonel." Travis and Bowie in the city both knew that if the prisoners in front of them were allowed to continue shouting, the Alamo defenders would collapse, because some people were wavering now. After all, no one wanted to make a hopeless struggle. Now all they could do was silence these poor men forever. Colonel Travis took a drag on his cigar and placed it on the fuse of the cannon point, but at this time, Crockett stopped Travis. "What are you doing? I know these people. They are Colonel Manning's men. They are traitors." Travis pushed Crockett away and let the fuse point with a loud boom. The prisoners who came to persuade them to surrender shut their mouths forever. Seeing such behavior made Tazanana very angry. It was clear that he had exhausted all his kindness, but they dared to reject his kindness. It's not just Tazanana who is angry. Even Gabilenz and Stadion are also angry. They even kill their own people. These people are simply crazy. It seems that they can't do what Archbishop Prussia asked them to do. At this time, the letter from Archduke Franz Karol arrived again. Hearing the name Franz Karol, Tazanana's brows relaxed slightly. There was only one sentence in the letter. The next priority is to attack the city, and the highest priority is to attack the heart. Tazanana laughed after reading the letter. He handed the letter to Gabilenz and Stadion and praised Archduke Franz Karol as a genius. Both Gabilenz and Stadion knew that Archduke Franz Karol's brain was not very good, but they both accepted the letter curiously. Gabilenz and Stadion, who read the letter, seemed to understand something. This time, Tazanana's messengers came to the Alamo again. "General, Tazanana orders you to remove the old, weak, women and children in the city. The general swears to God to ensure their safety. After the civilians are evacuated, a full-scale bombardment of the Alamo will be carried out." This time Travis did not hesitate. He didn't know if this was a Mexican conspiracy, but if the other side really attacked the city in full force, the Alamo would probably be a river of blood. As a soldier, his honor prevented him from letting the old, weak, women and children to be buried with myself. James Bowie agreed with Travis. After all, fighting is between men. However, Crockett had a different opinion. He believed that, as long as the old, weak, women and children were still there, the Mexicans would not dare to conduct a comprehensive bombardment. If they did, Tazanana would have to be responsible for the bombardment of civilians in the end. The militarist sense of honor made Travis reject Crockett's opinion. This was the second time Travis had offended Crockett, which made the US congressman very unhappy. 2 hours later, the old, weak, Women and children had left the Alamo, and Tazanana sent his most capable assistant to escort those people to San Antonio Point. The 16-pounder gun was also ready, and at the same time, accompanied by the loud sound of the trumpet, the bombardment began. This time the bombardment was much more accurate than the previous bombardment, because Gablenz Stadion took advantage of the departure of the old, weak women and children to adjust the firing angle and gun position to ensure that the artillery could hit as soon as possible. The power of the 16-pound siege artillery was huge. The first shot destroyed the tower on the south side. The collapsed tower directly buried the garrison team stationed near it. But before the defenders of the Alamo could rescue the people buried under the rubble, shells began to roar one after another inside the Alamo fortress. Gravel was flying, and fire was everywhere. Many people were injured by the gravel hit by the shells. Travis wanted to organize an artillery counterattack, but the opponent's firepower was too strong, and he could not raise his head at all. The Mexican army's small caliber artillery has been replaced with incendiary bombs. In this era, incendiary bombs are a type of grenades filled with flammable substances such as grease. They ignite surrounding objects through explosion, and are very inefficient. But it is more lethal than firing solid iron bullets, and can make the defenders exhausted. The power of the 16-pounder cannon is astonishing. Each shot can cause large-scale collapse. The power is not comparable to that of the 3-pounder cannon. The shelling of the 16-pounder gun directly hit the fortress wall, causing a large-scale collapse. Even horses, let alone infantry, could easily pass through such a large gap. Bowie immediately organized people to block the gap with caravans and furniture, but the Mexicans had no intention of attacking. Damn it, do the Mexicans have endless artillery shells? Do they want to bury us with heavy artillery? Crockett passed by with a bucket. Stop complaining and put out the fire first, otherwise you will be choked to death if you don't burn to death. The bombardment lasted for 2 hours. The Mexican army stopped the bombardment, not because they ran out of shells, or because they were preparing to attack the city, but because the barrels of the guns were overheated, and would explode, if fired further. Crockett found his old servant in the ruins. "John, you old guy, I knew you were still alive." The old servant slowly opened his eyes, spat out a pile of crumbs, and looked at his master with tears in his eyes. "Mr. Crockett, I can't move my legs." Crockett didn't care about his frayed hands, but comforted John. "Don't worry, when I get back to Tennessee, I will find the best doctor and I will definitely cure you." But Crockett didn't find the old servant's legs. "Mr. Crockett, go home, the mistress is still waiting for you." The old servant, whose consciousness was about to disappear, used his last strength to push Crockett away. At the same time, the broken wall on the side could no longer support it and collapsed, hitting Crockett's position heavily. "No, John. Damn it. I'm going to fight those Mexicans." In the Alamo fortress, many soldiers who had lost relatives and friends roared, "Yes, if you go out and fight, you'll end up dead anyway. Show them the courage of the Western cowboy. Kill them and take revenge." Revenge. Bowers' leg was penetrated by a shrapnel, but he also thought that instead of waiting to die here, it would be better to rush out and kill him. But Travis stopped them, because he saw that the Mexican troops around him had been staying in the fortifications, and it would be suicidal to rush out now. "That's enough. Go back to your posts. If you go out, you will commit suicide. General Houston will come to save us." "Where is General Houston? Where are the reinforcement?" a soldier shouted angrily. "We were abandoned. We are outcasts. I want to go home." Travis fired his gun into the air. "That's enough. Tazanana is a dictator and a barbarian. You will die if you go out. Didn't you see that red flag? As long as the Mexicans raise that red flag, it means they will not accept any prisoners. Believe me, General Houston will definitely come to save us." The thing about the Mexican red flag is a rumor. The Mexicans not only have red flags, but also green and white ones, which are the colors of the Mexican flag. In the afternoon the Mexicans continued their shelling, but did not launch an attack. Tazanana was not in a hurry, because he knew that he could capture the Alamo at any time now. The Alamo defenders could not bear this situation of being passively beaten. At night, Crockett organized more than 20 desperados to prepare to destroy the Mexican artillery position, at least to destroy the 16-pound cannon point. However, the Mexicans were well prepared. After a firefight, Crockett and several fellow Tennesseans fled back to the Alamo in embarrassment. The Mexicans did not pursue, not because of their high military literacy, but because they did not know how many people there were on the other side. Due to malnutrition, many Mexican soldiers suffered from night blindness, so there were hundreds of people fighting with more than 20 people, and in the end only a dozen people were killed. When Crockett returned to the Alamo, Colonel Travis was already in uniform. Do you know what you are doing? You should be court-martialed, or even I could shoot you right now, Colonel Travis. Crockett is doing it for everyone's benefit. The Mexican cannons are too powerful. 50 of our people died in the shelling during the day. Almost no part of the front wall is intact. If this continues, there's not even any shelter from the wind. Don't think that, because you are a US congressman, I don't dare to shoot you. This is Texas. This sentence made Crockett and the volunteers from the United States very unhappy. On March 10, 1836, the bombardment continued. Tazenana invited Gablenz and Stadion to have lunch together on the hillside, watching the Alamo covered in artillery fire as they ate. This artillery is really powerful. If our Mexican army was equipped with all this kind of artillery, we would no longer be afraid of the Americans, Gablenz and Stadion complained in their hearts. If any army takes dozens of these things on the road, the marching speed will probably be slower than a turtle crawling. The two just smiled and did not answer, because they did not refuse any opportunity to make money. But what the two of them didn't expect was, I would like to hire you two as my military advisors. You can choose your official position and salary. As the President of Mexico, as long as it is within my scope of authority, I will definitely meet your requirements. Just as Gablenz and Stadion were about to speak, they were interrupted by Tazenana. I tell you, Mexico has the largest silver mine in the world, which is unique. You will definitely say that those silver mines are not in the hands of the Mexican government. Yes, but as long as this war is over, I will return home with an army to destroy those who oppose me. I would like to be a friend of Archduke Franz Karl. I will make Mexico a member of the civilized world and the most loyal ally of the Austrian Empire. The commanding ability of the two men far exceeds that of any of my subordinates. Even I'm ashamed of myself. I think the two of them are not military observers, but real generals. Tazenana's last sentence directly pointed out the identity of Gablenz and Stadion. They knew very well that, if they refused Tazenana's good intentions, they might encounter an accident halfway. Gablenz and Stadion still had a doubt in their minds why Tazenana admired the Archduke, who was not very bright-minded, so much. We need to write a letter to Archduke Franz Karl, and we need to get his approval. No problem. I believe in Archduke Franz Karl. He will definitely recognize me as his friend. Tazenana felt in his heart that he, the North American Napoleon, had surpassed the real Napoleon, because he chose to join forces with Archduke Karl. Just imagine, if Napoleon and Archduke Karl had joined forces, who would have been able to fight in Europe. Inside the Alamo city, shelling destroyed the last building in the Alamo fortress. The windmill fell and destroyed the stables, and the panicked horses caused continued chaos when counting the casualties. It was discovered that there were only 75 Alamo defenders left, and all of them were wounded. Just cleaning the battlefield silently. Travis and Bowie got into an argument at the makeshift command post. At this time, the Mexicans sent 2 doctors and a white flags to treat the wounded soldiers out of humanitarianism. Travis could not refuse this humanitarian act, but what he didn't know was that the real identities of the 2 doctors were actually Catholic priests. The purpose of their trip was to persuade the wounded soldiers to convert to Catholicism, or to teach. Tazenana surrendered in exchange for a chance to leave the battlefield safely. When a person is about to die, no straw is good, let alone a doctor. The Catholic doctor's persuasion moved the hearts of many wounded soldiers, especially those who were seriously injured. But Travis couldn't accept that these Catholics had shaken his military morale. So they shot and killed a doctor and drove the remaining doctors out of the Alamo. Doctors and priests have a very high social status in Mexico. When a Catholic doctor was wrapped in white cloth, and carried out on a stretcher. The Mexican army burst into unprecedented anger. They may not have known why they were fighting before, but now they feel they should kill all the thugs in the Alamo fortress. Soldiers and officers continued to come to Tazanana to ask for battle, but Tazanana was very happy because he knew that the confidence of the Alamo defenders had collapsed. Sure enough, at night, a gun battle broke out inside the Alamo fortress. Crockett was elected leader by the Tennessee Volunteers and wounded soldiers and launched a surprise attack on Travis' men. Bowie was locked in the dungeon of the fortress. By the end of the battle, fewer than 50 men remained at the Alamo. Crockett surrendered to Tazanana. Bowie was captured, and Travis died in the rebellion. The Battle of the Alamo ended with a major victory for the Mexican army, and the Alamo's capture by their own people became the biggest scandal of the Battle of Texas. Crockett was a US congressman, so Tazanana was very polite to him and asked doctors to treat Crockett and the prisoners, and sent a large number of reporters to interview Crockett and the prisoners. Of course, these reporters would only record evidence that was favorable to Mexico. The news reached Washington, and Andrew Jackson angrily slammed the newspaper on the coffee table. Remember, the shame of the Alamo. They are the shame of the United States. Faced with the siege of the Mexicans, they actually killed each other in order to surrender. They are simply useless. Today is the second round of recommendations. Please support me with your votes. The next chapter begins. Returning to Austria. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.